straight like that.
Our book for today on the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Kingdom of Lies, Unnerving Adventures in the World of Cybercrime by Kate Fazzini. This is from the preface. It didn't take me long in my career as a cybersecurity executive to figure out everyone was lying to me. The biggest lie of all came at the very beginning, that cybersecurity is hard, too hard, certainly too difficult for someone who lacks years and years of deep technical training. That is no place for writers. That thicket of incomprehensible jargon alone seemed meant to discourage outsiders like me from entering the field. They told me I could never hope to understand the terminology unless I'd worked around it for a very long time, unless I had a special and complicated certification, unless I knew how to take apart and reassemble a computer, unless I knew how to code in Python and could read it, interpret it, and spot problems on sight. And if I somehow managed to learn the lingo, the learning curve for the rest of it would prove insurmountable. Lies, lies, lies. It's unfortunate because there's a huge gap between the demand for cybersecurity workers and the people available to fill those jobs. I think one of the reasons for that is because people can't imagine themselves doing this kind of work. Can you use a smartphone, make a PowerPoint, think on your feet, ever organize a night out to the movies with your friends that went well and nobody crashed their car to or from the event? Welcome to the 21st century's hottest career path. Are you able to charm the pants off women? Did you escape an abusive marriage? Have you ever hosted a toddler's birthday party at your home? Honey, I want you on my cybersecurity team. After reading the stories in this book, you will understand that what makes cybersecurity complicated is the complexity of human beings. So if you know how to deal with people, you can handle internet security. If you understand what makes people tick, not only will you be able to recognize a threat, you'll be one step ahead of your adversary. During my career as a cybersecurity executive at multinational corporations, a journalist for Wall Street Journal and later CNBC, and a professor at Georgetown University, I've met a lot of fascinating people. From the hackers who perpetrate malicious attacks to the security professionals who try to prevent these incidents from happening, and the alphabet soup of government agencies that do damage control. At the end of the day, they're all fathers, sons, mothers, sisters, and spouses. In other words, people just like us. Yes, the white hats cross paths with black hats and change alliances more frequently than you might expect, but they're driven by the same desires as the rest of us, even if sometimes it feels as if everyone in cybersecurity is allergic to the truth. As a professional, I was told a great many lies about the field I have grown to love so much. After becoming a journalist on the cybersecurity beat, I was told even more. Here are a few. Let me introduce you to the hacker community. This lie is usually delivered with a wink and a nod from someone who thinks they know every hacker on the planet. The truth of the matter is there is no hacker community. Sure, the guys who make a splash at the big annual conferences might say otherwise, but every country, every state, every faction, every identifying group has its own community of people who hack computers. Some of them are extremely conservative. Others are massively liberal. Some fall in between. Some wear suits and ties and work as lawyers during the day, while others look like everyday citizens and have great people skills as they pursue the idiosyncratic agendas. Some are good guys who got fed up with low pay and boring duties and became criminals. Some are criminals who ended up being good guys. Many start and end their careers on either end of that spectrum. Some, including many you'll meet in this book, are extremely proficient hackers who have no time or inclination to identify with any community at all. As a journalist, I was astonished at the number of people who came out of the woodwork to offer me exclusive access to the hacker community. I couldn't help but notice that the members of the source's hacker community were often people just like him or her. My point is there are many different types of people working in this field, and I can guarantee you that a lot of them are exactly like you. Here's another lie. He's a luminary in the cybersecurity field. He's probably not. Fame and luminescence don't typically intersect in this field. The people I've met who are actual geniuses aren't famous, and most of them don't have social media profiles. They tend not to pontificate on areas outside their expertise. The people who are constantly headlining conferences and who are so often offered up to me for interviews have less insight than those who stay underground. Anything a high-profile hacker is willing to share typically carries with it a massive and crystal-clear agenda that I've learned to spot from a mile away. Even if a conversation is off the record, the intel coming from a top government official or other marquee corporate cybersecurity name carries little novel information. The only people who have illuminated the way for me in this world, and in this book, have been genuine practitioners who never held a C-level title. You've never heard of them, and because I've changed their names to protect their privacy, you probably never will. They are luminaries not because of the degrees they've collected or the events they've headlined, but because they carry a lantern that guides the path for others. These types of people typically don't have a public relations team. One of my favorite lies, he doesn't know what he's talking about. This one is usually delivered by someone who asserts that he or she knows the cybersecurity field better than anyone else. These people will brag that they know what it's like to be a hacker and can do things that no one else in the room can do. I'm always wary of those who try to establish their bona fides by discrediting the expertise of other cybersecurity professionals. The depth and breadth of this field is so vast that anyone who works in it is an expert at some part of it.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And greetings from Chicago. We're here live at the Sheet Metal Workers Smart 265 Hall. We have a great panel all 3 hours. They're going to be with us. We've got a studio audience. We've got Paul over here with the microphone. And if at any point you want to ask a question or speak to an issue, flag him down and flag me down, and I'll call on you, and Paul will get the microphone to you. We have with us, first of all, we have among the people here on the panel, Jim Allen, who is the president of the Bricklayers and Allied Craft Workers. They do bricklayers, tuck pointers, marble, granite, terrazzo, all the trowel trades. And we have John Daniel, the business manager of the Sheet Metal Workers Smart 265, also the host of this thing. And thank you, John, for having us here. And also thanks for providing the pizza to the studio audience. Sure. That's a real bonus. Now I know why you all showed up. So, and Lou Cairo, who is a senior partner with the CWG Personal Injury Law Firm, and who is the WCPT legal analyst. He's every month on WCPT, and he knows pretty much everything about everything that has to do in particular with personal injury law, but also labor law. So we're going to be talking about those issues. We're going to be talking about impeachment. We're going to be talking about politics. I want to get these guys' opinions. I want to hear from the audience. We're going to have a fascinating 3 hours here, and I'm really, 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 really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Let me first just recap some of the news that's going on, just basically the impeachment news. Today, the former envoy to the Ukraine, Kurt Volker, testified before members of that was yesterday, testified before members of three House committees. These were the first formal depositions in the impeachment inquiry. This is going to get real interesting. Volker reportedly testified, this, by the way, from a great summary blog by Hunter over at Daily Kos. He reportedly testified, we don't know because it was in closed session, but things leak, that he had warned Rudy Giuliani, Trump's lawyer, that the stories that Giuliani was pursuing on Joe and Hunter Biden were a lie, number one. Number two, that Giuliani's sources were untrustworthy. And this is our former envoy to Ukraine, the guy who would know, right? The guy who was there, the guy, and he's saying that no, there's no there. Secondly, a mysterious packet of propaganda that was delivered yesterday to Congress by the State Department, or the day before yesterday by the State Department Inspector General. This is really weird stuff. There was this pile of stuff that makes it look like there's some kind of weird deep state conspiracy and the Ukrainians and oligarchs and all this stuff, all to take down Donald Trump, and suggesting that the Democratic Party had hacked itself, and they did it out of Ukraine, and that's where you'll find Hillary Clinton's secret server. But we already know that there is no Hillary Clinton secret server, and the server that she had was just like what was done by other people, and besides that, she turned it over to the FBI. But nonetheless, it looks like this stuff came from. Some of it was apparently forged. It was like on phony federal letterhead and things like this. So we've got all that, and it was just basically to smear the former U.S. ambassador to the Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch. She was recalled by the people in the Trump White House because of this, crazy conspiracy stuff, and Giuliani, very strange stuff. Mitch McConnell said yesterday that Donald Trump claimed that Mitch McConnell had told him that the transcript of the conversation with the president of Ukraine proved that he was not trying to do a quid pro quo, and that it was the most innocent conversation ever. And then also, you'll recall a week or so ago, I was ranting about when the transcript came out that there were these ellipses, these missing pieces of the conversation, and I was like, "What's this?" And people were like, it's just, that's just a literary device. Well, now the New York Times, the Washington Post, other agents, other groups are saying, it's pretty clear that in a 30-minute conversation, there's only 11 minutes worth of talk here, and those ellipses, which were at pretty critical points, probably actually did have something to do with something missing. Other stuff to catch you up to date on. The text messages, this is what came out yesterday, text messages from Trump's own team were, and this is from Kurt Volker's testimony before Congress. He released a whole raft of text messages that basically showed these guys conspiring to extort or bribe Ukraine, depending on how you want to say it, either withholding the military aid, and hey, your whole country might go down. That's kind of extortion. Or alternatively, we'll give you military aid if you give us dirt on Biden, which would be considered bribery. The Constitution, of course, says bribery is an impeachable offense. The Republicans had run out right after the hearing, Jim Jordan in particular, and said, "Oh, it completely exonerates us." And then somebody leaked the text messages, and now all of a sudden they just all shut up and went. It was like cockroaches scurrying when the lights go on. Today, the Inspector General, the IG, I described this a while ago. He's sort of like, you watch the cop shows, and there's the Internal Affairs Department, the guys in the police department that all the cops hate because they're the cops for the cops. Well, every federal department has one of these groups, one of these guys, and they have the legal right, and this is federal law. They have the legal right not only to report to the president, who is technically their boss, the head of the agencies. All these agencies fall under the executive branch. But they also, by law, have the legal right to testify directly to Congress, to report directly to Congress. And that's what the Inspector General for the intelligence communities is doing today before a closed-door session. And he's the guy, by the way, who originally came to Congress and said Joe McGuire, the director of national intelligence, is stonewalling this whistleblower thing. So expect more, semi-shocking revelations to come out later on. Donald Trump, in a tweet this morning, claimed, "I have the absolute right, perhaps even a duty," this is a verbatim quote from his tweet, "to investigate or have investigated corruption, and that would include asking or suggesting other countries to help us out." Well, technically, of course, if you think that there's corruption, and particularly if it might involve the United States and another country has the information, but when you say to them, and by the way, if you don't find this dirt, we're going to hurt you, that's a completely different thing. So, Trump this is a real Hail Mary, and we'll see where this goes. Moscow Mitch came out today and laid this out. He said, this is what he said. This was in a press conference just a few hours ago. He says, "Nancy Pelosi is in the clutches of a left-wing mob. They finally convinced her to impeach the president. All of you know your Constitution. The way that impeachment stops is a Senate majority with me as the majority leader." And then, actually, this wasn't a press conference. This was, he said it into the camera. Oh, I see. This is a video that he emailed out to his donors, because at the end he says, "But I need your help. Please contribute before the deadline." Oh, jeez. Right. And so then Trump issues another tweet, basically double dog daring Nancy Pelosi to hold him accountable. He says that he's not going to have his executive branch comply with subpoenas unless the entire House holds a vote on whether this is a formal impeachment inquiry. Now, there is nothing in the law that requires this. But he may regret it if she does this. I mean, this kind of vote actually happened before the Nixon investigations. In fact, there were only, as I recall, 4 members of Congress who voted no on Nixon, because by that point in time, it was so obvious what a crook this guy was. With Trump, it's hard to say. I mean, Nixon wasn't blackmailing members of Congress or threatening them, and didn't have primary challenges and didn't have a bunch of billionaires behind him and didn't have Fox News and all that. But still, Nancy Pelosi has a majority of votes. And then finally, Donald Trump sent out an email this morning trashing Adam Schiff that was just nuts. So we're going to get to all of our panelists and their thoughts on this recap that I just shared with you on other issues of the day. We're obviously going to talk about labor a lot. We've got the whole day here. We've got the whole 3 hours for the program. It's going to be real interesting, and I'm really looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to your thoughts and questions. We also have 2 people here who are running for elective office. And good on them. And we're going to hear from them, too. So stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Okay, and welcome back. I guess my news summary was a good start. I don't know if one of you guys wants to riff on that. Jim, let me start with you. What are your thoughts about this whole circus and what's going on?
Well, I think it's a pretty sad day in America when this president just basically does whatever he wants and there's no accountability. He's lied how many thousands of times. He takes people to his hotels, which is against the law. It's just he surrounds himself with complete criminals, and he's been getting away with it. I know Nancy Pelosi did not want this impeachment. I mean, she's been fighting impeachment because she thinks it may play into his hands come election time. But then it got to the point, really? We're looking at what he's doing, and then you're going to turn your back again because we're worried about 2020. It's a whole lot worse than Watergate, and we all saw what happened during Nixon and Watergate. So I think they're doing the right thing, but there's always a questionable outcome of how it affects the election in 2020, which gets me a little nervous.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I want to bring it back to repeat that when we rejoin with WCPT. So, and in fact, let me just riff on a couple of things, and then we'll get you guys all back on the air in just a minute. Nancy Pelosi just tweeted. This is real interesting. I mean, this is going to be, I think, the narrative, ultimately, is Trump is going to be saying, oh, I was just being the good cop, right? I'm just looking for information. And Pelosi and the Democrats are going to be saying, no, you were cutting a deal. And this is the tweet that she just tweeted at 7:32 this morning Eastern time. She said, what did Donald Trump promise China in exchange for interfering in our election? Because that was his pitch yesterday, right? It was essentially China, if you're listening. We already know in 2016, he said, Russia, if you're listening, the media will treat you nicely if you come up with Nancy Pelosi or with Hillary Clinton's emails. And obviously, they got a lot more than just that. But anyhow, she continues the tweet. What did real Donald Trump promise China in exchange for interfering in our election? An easier deal on trade, ignoring the crackdown on Hong Kong's pro-democracy movement? Now, the trade deal is a real interesting one because Donald Trump is, the Axios does a newsletter called their Market Newsletter. It's about the economy. And if you don't subscribe to it, it's free, and you can just get an email, and it's a fascinating one. And in their newsletter this morning, they were talking about how the economy is clearly slowing down. Manufacturing has been down for a couple of quarters now, and the service sector went down this month. And almost all of that looks like it tracks back to the trade war. And China's economy is starting to rebound now. They were at 5.5%, 6%. Now they're back up around 7% growth. They're still growing faster than we've grown since World War II. So it's not like they're having a problem with this. And it's because they've got this huge internal market. They've got 1 billion people. We only have 300 million people, more or less. So China tweeted out this morning, by the way, that maybe I'm repeating myself. I know we talked about this over breakfast, but China tweeted out this morning that we will not interfere in American domestic affairs. So we'll see how that plays out. Anyhow, Nancy Pelosi ends this up. What was he promising China? An easier deal on trade, ignoring the crackdown on Hong Kong's pro-democracy movement, condoning repression of religious freedom. And then the hashtag that Nancy Pelosi is using, and I would encourage you all to start using, is Truth Exposed. Hashtag Truth Exposed. We'll be right back. And welcome back. We're live in Chicago at Smart 265's. What do you call this, John? Union Hall?
Union Hall, yes,
yeah,
sir.
Union Hall. Okay, there you go. And so we've got Jim Allen and John Daniel and Louis Cairo. And Jim, you during the break we were talking about your thoughts on this. If you want to just recap what you said and give us your thoughts on this whole impeachment thing, I think
I can't remember where I was yesterday. I'm going to recap this. No, we had just talked. We were, we were talking a little bit about just the audacity of this president. That everything he does, whether it's lying and double down on his lying, whether it's having him the people from the service staying at his hotel, there's just no end to what this guy does, and nobody's putting a stop to it. And we had talked about Nancy Pelosi did not want to impeach this president. Felt it might be playing into his hands, let the election take place, and his popularity is in the gutter, except for his 30% base. But she felt, and we talked about it at breakfast, she really had no choice. This man is blatantly, right in our face, stealing the country. So that's why the impeachment started, and I'm worried about the outcome, whether it helps him or hurts him in 2020.
Which do you think it'll do?
Well, I think he might get impeached, but it's hard to believe that Moscow Mitch would allow that impeachment, but depends on what they find.
Yeah.
It could hurt us. That's what makes me nervous.
There you go. John Daniel, the business manager at Sheet Metal Workers of Smart 265, your thoughts?
Well, I think Nancy Pelosi, she's forced into a corner. She had to make a decision. She has to enforce the law, right? There's obviously credible, what I believe, crimes that have been committed that will force the impeachment process. So the likelihood of it getting through the House is very high. The probability, as Jim was saying, for it to be enforced in the Senate, it's going to be next to nothing. So where does that leave us? Does that leave Trump spinning the entire process into another fake news flurry? Does he become a martyr because of the exercise that the House has put him through? Does that create a better chance of him being reelected, or are we able to change that narrative to the general public so we can actually do the right thing? The entire process, as I'm listening to Jim and you talk, I think about my kids. I've got a 24-year-old, a 22-year-old, and an 18-year-old at home, and they don't know, they haven't seen anything with character that I grew up with as a presidential person. They haven't seen honor as a presidential candidate. They just, what are they going to...
the John Kennedys?
Yeah, what are they going to... What's their expectations as they build their families and their future? Where's a normalcy that has been the fabric of American society? It's just kind of dissolved in a very, very short period of time, and those are some of the things that keep me up at night.
One of the other things that's dissolving right now is Donald Trump is trying to put Anthony Scalia's son, who is a professional union buster, basically. He's a lawyer who advises big corporations on how to destroy unions, trying to put him in charge of the Department of Labor, which is, was originally designed to protect the rights of workers. This kind of stuff, and there's, he's got a coal lobbyist running the EPA, he's got an oil lobbyist running the Interior Department, he's got a telecom lobbyist running the FCC. It's on and on and on. These things are getting lost in the dust. That is a concern of mine. Your thoughts,
Absolutely.
John?
We've seen a swift deterioration of the middle class, with the separation in wealth. But the long-term effect of the current Supreme Court structure, the Department of Labor changes that have happened, the underfunding, the changing of directives. The Department of Labor was established to protect people to get up every day, put their boots on and go to work and build the country. And that's been lost and converted and twisted and perverted into a position where we need to take care of the corporations that are the job creators, and everyone else is just a tool to make them money. We've seen it from state to state. Wisconsin had Scott Walker, just a puppet to the Koch family. And thank goodness he's gone. But we had the same thing here in the state of Illinois with our previous governor, and he had a full frontal attack. Bruce Rauner, full frontal attack at organized labor, and I think because he came directly at us, where Scott Walker maybe played his cards, or frankly, I think he was just dumber. He played his cards slicker. He didn't come right at organized labor head on like Bruce Rauner did. He came at us directly, and our members saw that, and we stood up and we fought back, and he's out of office now. We've got a strong labor governor now in the state of Illinois. So you've said it, everybody said it, elections have consequences, and the consequences that we're seeing today, the amount of damage that one president, one governor can do in one term can undo 10s and 20s and 30s years, decades of work that people like me and my predecessors and everyone in this room and your listeners have worked diligently at to shore up. And in a blink of an eye, a tornado comes through and just devastates everything.
And let's not forget that phrase, elections have consequences, came from Ronald Reagan when people were yelling and screaming about his destroying unions. And he was like, screw you guys. Lou Cairo, I'm curious your thoughts on this. Also, as a personal injury lawyer, can I claim a personal injury against Trump?
Well, he's got allegedly has billions and billions of dollars, so at least we know he's got a deep pocket, right?
I think that's alleged.
Yeah, very much
My
so.
guess is he's actually underwater, but
yeah, he probably is. Well, of course, he says he's very liquid, so we could means that's the truth, right? Because the guy would never lie. He's the president of the United States, for God's sake.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Yeah, just a couple things. First, I want to mention one thing on the issue of the impeachment, because a lot of people don't really understand when you get what impeachment means. Clinton was impeached, Andrew Johnson was impeached. That just means that the House of Representatives, which we have a majority, of course, in the Democrats, he's going to be impeached. I'm sure President Trump they'll vote for.
It's the equivalent of an indictment.
It's an indictment, basically, and then what happens, unfortunately, is it shifts to the Senate. And it is tried. The case is actually tried in the Senate,
and that's where the defense and the prosecution both present their cases.
Yeah, he'll have like Ken Starr when Clinton was impeached. Right. Ken Starr, the special prosecutor, prosecuted it, and at that point, Chief Justice I think it was Rehnquist of the Supreme Court of the United States,
and his clerk John Roberts.
He presided over it. Well, now his clerk John Roberts is the Supreme Court Chief Justice. He will preside over this in the Senate, and we would need all the Democrats, and I think you talk like 20 Republicans to vote to convict him of the impeachment, of the articles of impeachment, which would get him thrown out. So when everybody hears in a couple of weeks, oh my God, Trump was impeached, it means nothing. It means he's going to McConnell's back, house, and as you said before, Mitch McConnell, he'll never get convicted.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Yep, Lou Cairo, excellent point, Saul. We'll be back with our labor panel and our studio audience live here from Chicago with WCPT.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Moving Forward by Corrine. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is No Visible Bruises, What We Don't Know About Domestic Violence Can Kill Us by Rachel Louise Snyder. I'm reading from the preface. This is page 4. Suzanne and I exchanged small talk on her brother's driveway that day in 2010. She and the family were still in preparation and packing mode for their annual camping vacation into the hinterlands of Maine, and Suzanne had been greeted by her brother Andre with a long shopping list. She had told me she worked for a domestic violence agency in town and that they had recently developed a new program that she was calling the Domestic Violence High Risk Team. Their primary aim was simple, she said. We try to predict domestic violence homicides before they happen so we can prevent them. It sounded immediately implausible. So implausible, in fact, that I thought I'd misheard some elemental piece of it. Predict, I remember saying? You said predict domestic violence homicides? I had come across domestic violence in my reporting over the years, not only in Cambodia, but also in places like Afghanistan, Niger, and Honduras. But it had never been a focus for me. Instead, it was always adjacent to whatever other story I was writing, so much so that it was practically banal. The young girls jailed for love crimes in Kabul, the Indian child brides who gave interviews only in front of the men who controlled them, the Tibetan women forcibly sterilized by the Chinese government, the teenage brides in Niger cast from their villages after post-pregnancy fistulas made them pariahs, the Romanian women forced to give to birth multiple children under Ceausescu and who now in their early 30s were grandmothers fated to poverty, the Cambodian street workers beaten and gang raped for weekend sport by well-heeled Khmer teenagers. All of these women in every country were brutalized and controlled by men as a matter of routine. Men made the rules, primarily through physical violence. It was there, lurking in practically every story I'd ever covered around the world, a shadowy background so obvious I didn't even have to ask about it most of the time. It was as common as rain. Until that moment in the driveway with Suzanne Dubas, if I thought of domestic violence in the United States at all, I saw it as an unfortunate fate for the unlucky few, a matter of bad choices and cruel environments. A woman hardwired to be hurt, a man hardwired to hurt. But I never envisioned it as a social ill, an epidemic we can actually do something about. Now here was Susan Dubas talking about preventative measures for a type of violence that, for the first time, I saw operating along a continuum. The young girl in India married as a child, the Tibetan woman sterilized, the Afghan woman jailed, the housewife in Massachusetts brutalized by her husband. They all shared a common privation, what domestic violence victims across the world lacked: agency in their own lives. The forces that brought a Cambodian prostitute to the brink of death were the same forces that killed thousands of women and children and men, but mostly women and children, across America and the entire globe every year. An average, in fact, of 137 women each and every day are killed by intimate partner or familial violence across the globe, and this does not include men or children. Everything in my body suddenly came alive that day. I saw all the faces of women around the world from over 2 decades of work, and I realized how rarely I'd gazed inward at my own country, at what we got wrong and what it meant. The universality of domestic violence and how it crisscrosses geographical, cultural, and linguistic barriers. Maybe all those other stories were in preparation for the day that I'd meet Paul Monson and look at the mountains from his living room windows. I ended up following Suzanne to the farmer's market and then to the grocery store and then to the liquor store as she prepped for her camping trip. I helped her carry ice and peaches and hamburger meat. I asked question after question while she drove and while her mother Pat sat in the passenger seat, chiming in here and there. How did it work? How many have you stopped? What else can you predict? My questions were vast and endless. Like many people who hold a casual acquaintance with a problem, I believed all the common assumptions. That if things were bad enough, victims would just leave. That restraining orders solved the problem. And that if a victim didn't show up to renew a restraining order, the problem had been solved. That going to a shelter was an adequate response for victims and their children. That violence inside the home was something private, unrelated to other forms of violence, perhaps most notably mass shootings. That a lack of visible injury signaled a lack of seriousness. And perhaps most of all, that unless we stand at the receiving end of a punch, such violence had nothing to do with us at all. Over the next few years, Suzanne Dubas and her colleague Kelly Dunn patiently taught me about the scope and history of an issue that still today is too often hidden. I learned why past approaches had failed and what we could do more effectively today. Between 2000 and 2006, 3,200 American soldiers were killed. During that same period, domestic homicide in the United States claimed 10,600 lives. This figure is likely an underestimate, as it was pulled from the FBI's supplementary homicide reports, which gather data from local police departments, and participation is voluntary. 20 people in the United States are assaulted every minute by their partners. Former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan called violence against women and girls the most shameful human rights violation, and the World Health Organization called it a global health problem of epidemic proportions. A study put out by the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime cited 50,000 women around the world were killed by partners or family members in 2017 alone. 50,000 women. The UNODC report called Home the most dangerous place for women. The book No Visible Bruises by Rachel Louise Snyder.
And we're back live from Chicago. We're broadcasting from the Union Hall of Smart 265. That's the Sheet Metal Workers Union. And actually, it's more than sheet metal workers. The ART means something. What was that, John?
Sheet metal, air, rail, and transportation.
Air, rail, and transport. Thank you very much. And Lou, you were talking just before we hit the break about what impeachment means. You know, there's a lot of people who've never seen a president impeached. They weren't old enough for Clinton's impeachment, and certainly a lot of people who weren't around when Nixon was almost impeached and he ultimately resigned. You want to close up that loop, finish your thoughts on that, exactly how that works, and how that might, in your opinion, and then I'd like to get everybody else's opinion on this, and also if anybody in the audience has questions or thoughts around this, feel free to flag down Paul and he'll get a mic to you. How that might affect a whole bunch of other issues, how that's going to affect the Democratic primary, how that, because right now, basically the main thing is who can beat Trump. Well, what if Trump is gone? And how is that going to affect issues like the environment, like labor, which is the principal thing that I want to bring pretty much everything around to today in our conversation. Your thoughts?
Well, first of all, you got to think back just like the last couple of months ago when they did all the Mueller hearings. Mm-hmm. And as people that aren't lawyers, that don't live in a courtroom like I do, or congressmen who live in congressional hearings, if you watch those hearings, they were pretty much a farce, right? You have legitimate questions. I don't care if it's Democrat or Republican. Legitimate questions. Guys never answering the question. The chairman and the other speakers are all screaming and yelling at each other. I mean, it was a circus, right? I mean, I was watching the one they're asking, did you report X, Y, or Z? I'd have to see the report you're referencing. No. Well, did you ever say X, Y, or Z? I want to see the report that you're looking at. Well, it's in the Mueller report. Did you say, what page is it on? Did you ever say X, Y, or Z? Just tell me what page. It's on page 92, paragraph 3. Can I see the report? You don't have the report? No, I don't have the report.
Yeah, that was Corey Lewandowski.
And it was absolutely the most ludicrous thing in the world.
It's disrespectful, too.
It's very disrespectful to the process. That doesn't happen in a court, okay? That ain't going to happen in the Senate either when the Chief Justice of the United States, whether he's a Republican or a Democrat, is not going to let this be a circus, okay? So things will be a little different. So once you get through the hearings in the House, they will take the articles of impeachment to a vote. I guarantee you every Democrat's going to vote for it. There's already one Republican, I don't remember his name, but he's already indicated he's in favor of it. We don't even need it. So once the articles of impeachment are voted upon...
It's Justin Amash of Michigan.
I'm sorry?
Justin Amash of Michigan, yeah.
Okay. You're my walking Google.
Yeah. There you go. I do this for a living. I mean.
It's so intimidating to be up here with this guy, I got to tell you, man. You have no idea. We got to talk about the law so I can think I know more than you do.
Yeah. Well, we can talk about judicial review if you want.
Well, once it gets to the Senate, it'll actually be more like a real trial. I mean, and Justice Roberts will preside over it. There will be questions and there'll be answers, and there won't be all this gamesmanship, this stuff that's really, if you watch it, I don't care what side of the fence you're on, you got to look and say, this is just disrespectful to our country that we've got $50 million of salaries in a room, that right? All these congressmen, they're all up there, and our tax dollars hard at work, and it's a total joke. It's not going to happen in the Senate. But what's also not going to happen in the Senate, like Jimmy said before, I don't think you're going to get 20. I don't know that you're going to get 2 senators. Imagine the reprisals when 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 Republicans vote, get them out of office.
Oh, we saw this with Jeff Flake and Bob Corker.
I mean, anybody who crosses this guy are destined.
But the thing that took down Jeff Flake and Bob Corker was a primary challenge. And those primaries are going to be, the primary challengers for all the senators who are running are pretty much going to be filed by the end of this year. So if this gets extended beyond that, do you think that's going to take some of the heat off these guys?
Yeah.
Or even after the primary season in February, March, April?
Yeah, no, I agree. And just make sure people are clear on what you're saying is if you did it today, and these guys did, if these certain Republicans would vote to have him impeached today and have him thrown out of office, there's plenty of time for Trump and the Republican Party to find other candidates to run against those particular Republicans.
Right, so like if Joni Ernst in Iowa, who is his raise some eyebrows here, right? If she was to say, yeah, I think probably Trump should be impeached, or at least there should even be hearings.
Yeah, they support a candidate tomorrow to get her in there, to get her out.
That's right.
But once the Senate hearings are going to be after all the people have already put their names in, they got their petitions in, and they're running in the primary. Now it's too late for him to really do anything other than get some grassroots efforts out there to get him not elected. But he doesn't have a candidate now.
Right.
So if they don't get elected, then it goes to the other side. It goes to a Democrat. So Trump would be. I think that's an advantage. The timing. The more that gets delayed, the better.
Yeah.
And then as far as the ramifications in the long run, like Jim was saying before, there's a line of thought that this is going to help Trump, assuming he doesn't get thrown out of office. He's going to get impeached. So what? He's not going to get thrown out of office. His base, who, like he said when he was running, I could stand on Fifth Avenue and put a bullet in a guy's face, and my ratings are going to go up. And you know what? They are, because his base is freaking crazy. No. With all due respect, and I know people that are Republicans, friends, businessmen, successful, educated, and I read their stuff on Facebook, and greatest president ever, greatest, most classy first lady ever. You want to see pictures of the classy first lady? They're drinking the Kool-Aid. It's like Jimmy Jones has infiltrated the world, and he's Donald Trump, and everyone's got the purple Kool-Aid.
Yeah, he's a cult leader.
So if he is not thrown out of office, his base, I think, is going to come out of the woodwork. Now, there's another line of thought that says, well, when all this stuff flushes out and people really hear the truth, what a bad guy he really is and what he's done, maybe the Democrats are going to wake up, and maybe Labor's going to get a much higher percentage of people voting for a Democratic Party rather than a Republican Party like the last election, which is unconscionable, and I still don't understand how that ever happened, but we know that it did. It was about 50-50, which is shocking. Jimmy, isn't that what your numbers were, like what you heard?
Yeah, it is shocking. And you know what? We've had surveys.
This is Jim Allen, the president of the Bricklayers.
Surveys in our international union where they actually called members after the election, and about 50% actually admitted on the phone that they voted for Donald Trump, which is amazing. And then another 15% wouldn't say. So what does that mean? If they're not going to say, that means, they're afraid of retribution, who's on the phone call. So that means probably 60% of our members voted for the guy.
Let's be clear here for a second. I mean, I know people who voted for Donald Trump. In fact, I knew quite a few of them, and oddly, a lot of them supported Bernie in the primary, and then they voted for Donald Trump. And the reason why, at the time, was that Trump said he was going to bring jobs back to the United States. He was going to blow up this whole neoliberal experiment with NAFTA that really originated with Reagan. I mean, the Reagan administration wrote the first draft of NAFTA. The Bush senior administration finalized it and got it all ready for a signature. But it was Bill Clinton who signed it, and the Democrats who kind of embraced that. And finally somebody came along and said both the Republicans and the Democrats are wrong about this. I agree with that, by the way. And the more Trump does his trade war stuff with China, the more people think, hey, he's out there fighting for me. So there was that, and he said he was going to stop immigration. And yes, there are a lot of people, a lot of working people who see, quote, illegal immigration as diluting the labor pool and cutting wages, and there's a legitimate argument to be made there. But the obvious and easy answer is go after the employers. But Trump is not going to do that. But he made a lot of promises that in some cases he seems to be trying to keep. In other cases, he's just completely ignoring. You're going to get better health care than Obamacare. Everybody's going to be covered. We find out that's a lie. He was going to be the best thing ever for labor. He's going to have a middle-class tax cut, and he's going to take a bath. These were all lies. How durable is that support? If at least half of it was based on lies.
And you're right, because when you're running for office, all you got to do is promise the moon. You lie about everything, you get elected.
Well, especially if you have no record. He had never been a politician, so nobody knew who he was.
Most politicians have a lot of records that they can get them on. Going back to NAFTA, I always like to remember this. Okay, so Clinton gets blamed for NAFTA,
right,
which it did go through him. But you got to remember, every single Republican voted for NAFTA,
and only about a third of the Democrats.
Well, I don't even think it was a third. I think it was like they needed like 6 or 8 of them, and that was Bill Daley that came in from Chicago and pushed the heck out of them to get 6 or 8
You're talking
Democrats.
About the Senate.
Yeah, 6 or 8 that would flip, and that's all that voted for it.
Yeah.
So it was really a Republican bill that they pushed 6 or 8 Democrats that got forced by Bill Daley back in the day, who was a Chicago politician. Well, he wasn't a politician.
And that's something we need to be repeating.
Yeah, so
all the
it
time.
was a Republican bill,
Right.
you know. So it was a few deadbeat Democrats that flipped.
Right.
Which
And he
they
also
shouldn't have
said
done.
he wasn't going to get us in any more stupid wars. And,
Yeah.
so far, thank God he hasn't. But,
Yeah.
what North Korea just launched a submarine-based missile at
didn't see
Japan,
that, yeah.
with a split warhead,
Yeah.
which is a violation of everything. I mean,
Well, we
back to
talked
you.
about it when he's a wounded animal like he is right now. Who knows what he's going to do? We talked about it at breakfast. Is he going to start a little war, throw a nuke out there and see what happens, get the attention off of him? This man doesn't care about America. He cares about one person, Donald Trump, and he's proved it for 3 years. But I don't know. I sit and watch this stuff, and I'm like, really? Is this American people that stupid? Are we that living in a cave that we don't look at this man, the language he uses in his tweets, and he's the most disrespectful human being that's ever sat in the White House, and I'm sure we've had some bad ones. But and is it because your 401k is up and you go, well, I don't care. You know what? He can do what he wants because my 401k is doing pretty good. Well,
Not after this week.
yeah,
Most
that
working people don't have
401k
401ks
can disappear real quickly like it did in 08 and 09. And but it's sad
George
that
Bush did.
it's sad that his approval rating is above 5%.
Yeah, there you go. That was Jim Allen, the president of the Bricklayers here in Chicago. John Daniel is with us. Lou Cairo is with us. We're live from Chicago. We're going to be picking up some of your thoughts from the audience as well. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And we're broadcasting live from the Sheet Metal Workers Labor Hall here, Smart 265, just outside Chicago. And welcome back. By the way, I'm just going to riff here a little bit, and then we'll get back. I want to hear from you too, John. We've got a question from the audience. Here we go. Okay.
Hi, my name's Hale. I'm a 33-year member of the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers.
Hey, great
Hey,
union.
thank you.
One of my brothers was a member of IBEW.
The topic came up of the Nixon administration and impeachment at that time, and the Republicans really weren't in favor of it, weren't pushing for it, until there was a tremendous groundswell from the people. So what can we do to get that groundswell from the people now in our times with the Trump administration to push it for impeachment?
Great
for the
question.
Senate
And your
to
point is
do what they
spot-
need to do and do what the right thing is.
Yeah, your point is spot on. When the Democrats, or when Congress first voted to investigate Richard Nixon, the public sentiment for his impeachment was at 19%. 6 months later, it was at 64%, as I recall, 65%. John, your thoughts?
The Nixon was that entire area was a little bit premature for me, so I remember my parents talking about it.
Well,
so.
I'm not asking about Nixon. I'm asking your thoughts about his question. I'm the official old fart up here, but I was asking about his question about how do we
build
spread the
groundswell?
word? Yeah,
and that's a loaded question. I'm trying to figure out how do I spread that word within my own membership base. The amount of spin that happens in the media now. With everything's a lie, our current president takes both positions of every issue. It's a very difficult. We talk regularly, trying to educate our base on what's important, and the way I define important to myself, my family, and my membership is the ability for me to provide for my family, and the ability for me to have some security when I go home, and to have a good school to send my kids to. That's what I vote for. That's what I encourage my base to vote for, and that's like the core Maslow's kind of law of hierarchy. What do I need to survive? I need income. I need security. I need family. I tell my members on a regular basis, and the people in my community, regardless of what side of the fence they're on politically, that if I can provide for my family and eventually at some point up that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if I want to either take a pro-gun or anti-gun position, if I want to take a pro-life or abortion, if I want to take those auxiliary positions, that's way up the food chain from me providing for my family. So when I talk to my members, that's the message that I take, because we have gun people, we have anti-gun people, we have pro-life, we have membership that takes both positions. They're generally centered, I think, collectively, but the core value is, how do I provide for my family? How do I have some type of sense of dignity when I get up and go to work every day, when I come home, and how do I eventually retire with some dignity? That's the core value. And if you lose focus on what you need to survive, everything else becomes white noise. You become disenfranchised with the entire process, and I think that's part of what we're seeing today is that disenfranchising position, and changing that message, that narrative. We just got to keep talking to people. We got to bring it back to the core value.
This ongoing war on labor that's coming out of the Trump administration and the Republican Party. I mean, it's been going on since the 1930s. Good one. Thank you, John. We'll be back. Stick around. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're live from the Union Hall for the sheet metal workers here in suburban Chicago with WCPT. And John Daniel, Jim Allen, Louis Cairo on the panel with us. And during the break, we had a person ask a question: how do we help build a groundswell of support for impeachment? And John, you were saying, let's not forget to talk about, if I'm paraphrasing you right, let's not forget to keep talking also about, the really core stuff, like, can I make a living? We just heard that over 260,000 jobs were created in the last, whatever it was, month or quarter. I don't know how they do these. But it turns out that wages are actually flat. In fact, in many areas, wages are declining. So the war on labor is continuing. So, continue to talk about that in addition to how outraged you are. Is that a good summary of what you had to say?
Sure. I think we hear all the time from labor leaders, and I'm sure Jim hears it. There's a shortage of skilled, qualified workforce. There's a shortage of building tradespeople. There's a shortage of welders. There's a shortage of IBEW guys. We hear that across the board. There's not a shortage of skilled labor. There's an absolute shortage of skilled labor who will work for less. That's the problem, and that's the piece of the conversation that we're missing collectively.
Yeah, I think so. Lou, your thoughts on as an answer to that question of how do we build a groundswell of support like happened during the Nixon impeachment?
Well, that was even before my time. Even though I'm 61, if I knew the answer to this question, I'd be like the smartest man in the world. But I think what we need to do is, Trump's base is Trump's base. He'll shoot someone in the face. It's not going to affect their votes. The Democratic Party, our base is our base. They're going to be against him because he's a Republican. Forget the fact that he's an out of his mind, insane lunatic. The question is, how do you get the people like the independents and the other people that maybe they're on the fence?
Or the low information voters, the people who get all of their news from just catching 15 minutes on the radio every day.
So what do we do to motivate those people to pick up the telephone, to call their Republican congressional leaders, their senators and their representatives in the House of Representatives, and say, hey, I'm watching the news, this congressional hearing is going up, I'm against this. My neighbors, our little town here that we vote Republican, we're against this. And you got to
against what? You mean against the corruption?
We're against
of the Trump,
what's
of the Trump
going on. We want him out. We want you to know you better vote to get him out. If you're a Republican and you're thinking, hey, I own my state. I've been here for 20 years. No one's ever going to vote me out of office. Trump, I don't want to be an enemy to Trump, right? I'll say the right thing as long as because there's no primary candidate coming against me. I'm golden. But if his own people in their town, their cities, across their states are calling up saying, hey, we don't like what we see. We think he should be out. We'd rather see Pence as the president. Whatever they're going to say, that's going to put a little bit of pressure on a Republican senator when he's voting because Mitch McConnell's saying, we're not going to do this, are we? We're not going to. Well, my people are against him. My people want him out. And I have to represent my constituents. if they don't get those phone calls, all they get is browbeaten by Mitch McConnell and Trump. Why would they ever vote? What, because they're going to do the right thing for the right reasons for the American people?
When they never have on any other topic?
Yeah, they're going to start now? Seriously?
Yeah. Okay. And Jim, real quick, your question, because we've got a person with a question back here.
Getting back to the Nixon thing, I think I was 40.
You're older than
I think
us.
that
You
I was
remember.
40 when they impeached him. No, just kidding. But I do remember a little bit about the Nixon world. But the difference then was you had integrity. It's hard to say a Republican has an integrity.
Yeah, it was Barry
but back
Goldwater
then,
walked over and told Nixon to resign.
But guess what? You know what? You got to go. But because they did have integrity. There's no integrity left. It's all bought and sold. You know, Citizens United buys everybody. So there is no integrity. It's all about who's going to give me the money to keep myself elected no matter what. You know, I can cheat. I can be a scumbag, drain the swamp. There is no draining of the swamp. He just brought more swamp people in. But it's all about the money and Citizens United. And Obama said it to, remember when he walked over to the State of the Union and he pointed to Roberts and said, you were wrong. And he shook his head because he knew Citizens United would change politics forever. And it really has. So that's the difference between the Nixon days and what's going on now.
Yeah, and that's our big challenge. On the other hand, we didn't have social media back then, so you know
No, we didn't have that
be
either.
speaking out
Again,
to all
bought
our
and
friends
paid for
neighbors.
Fox TV.
Right. So we have a question from the audience.
No, this is am I?
Yeah. No, we're hearing you just fine.
This is a comment, a follow-up to the question here. First of all, I'd like to thank you for being here, for our sponsors for supporting this.
Thank you.
But I think the tide has started to change already. I live in Kane County. Lauren Underwood is now my state rep.
And she's great. She's just great.
That was supposed to have been impossible. I've had a number of friends for years in the neighborhood and so on that I'm a Republican, my whole family and so on. But we could talk about politics and talk about issues up until about 4 or 5 years ago. One friend out of the blue whose father was a Republican elected official, we were having breakfast out of nowhere. She said, I no longer consider myself a Republican. I hate them, and I am hearing more and more of that without soliciting. I believe that time has changed. Now, Trump has said he could shoot people. I think some people that were Republican leaning, and some of it was just habit. This was what my family did, etc. I think people have had enough of it, and I think we're going to see that change come soon.
Yeah. From
Thank
your
you.
lips to God's ears.
Hope you're right.
Yeah. Are you guys getting the sense of this, Jim Allen? With the bricklayers, are you hearing from your union members that they're starting to get disgusted?
Well, I think, like the person there that stood up, I agree. I think it is changing. DuPage County is a perfect example. It was a very red county, and it's really turned blue overnight. Well, I shouldn't say overnight, but in the last 5 years. Lauren Underwood, back during the primary, came to our training center because she wanted to see what was going on with labor and how we train people. So she came to our training center, and I sat and met with her. She's a brilliant woman. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, wait a minute now. This is a African-American woman in a complete white county and running against how many were in that race? There were probably 4 other Democrats. And I thought, well, yeah, she's a brilliant woman, but how's she going to win this thing? And she won it. And I think she'll stay in there for a long time. And it just says a lot about where we're going when we can get someone in a complete white county elected because of what they stand for, not the color of their skin. So it was very, very interesting.
Yeah, good steps, good direction. We're live from Chicago. We'll be back right after the news at the top of the hour. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on
We say fight back!
Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Settlers, the Mythology of the White Proletariat, the True Story of the White Nation by J. Sakai, published by Morningstar Press in 1989. This is from Chapter 2, The Foundations of Settler Life. The life of European settlers and the class structure of their society was abnormal because it was dependent upon a foundation of conquest, genocide, and enslavement. The myth of the self-sufficient white settler family clearing the wilderness and supporting themselves through their own initiative and hard labor is a propaganda fabrication. It is the absolute characteristic of settler society to be parasitic, dependent upon the super-exploitation of oppressed peoples for its style of life. Never has Euro-American society completely supported itself. This is the decisive factor in the consciousness of all classes and strata of white society from 1600 to now. Settler society was raised up above the level of backward old Europe by a foundation of conquest. This conquest was a miracle drug for a Europe convulsed with the reaction of decaying feudalism and deadly capitalism. Shot into the veins of the Spanish feudal nation, for instance, the miracle drug of the New World conquest gave Spain the momentary power to overrun North Africa, Holland, and Italy before her historical incident waned. Like many such fixes for Euro-Americans, this conquest was addicting. It was habit-forming and rapidly indispensable, not only culturally, but in the mechanism of an oppressor society whose lifeblood was new conquest. We'll examine this later in the relationship of settlerism to imperialism. For now, it's enough to see that this conquest is a material act of great magnitude, an economic and social event as important as the emergence of the factory system or the exploitation of petroleum in the Middle East. We stress the obvious here because the Euro-American settlers have always made light of their invasion and occupation, although the conquered territory is the precondition for their whole society. Traditionally, European settler societies throw off the propaganda smoke screens that they didn't really conquer and dispossess other nations. They claim with false modesty that they merely moved into vacant territory. So the early English settlers depicted America as empty, a howling wilderness, unsettled, sparsely populated, just waiting with a vacant sign on the door for the first lucky civilization to walk in and claim it. Theodore Roosevelt wrote defensively in 1900, quote, "The settler and pioneer have at bottom had justice on their side. This great continent could not have been kept as nothing but a game preserve for squalid savages," end of quote. It is telling that this lie is precisely the same lie put forward by white Afrikaner settlers who claim that South Africa was literally totally uninhabited by any Africans when they arrived from Europe. To universal derision, these European settlers claim to be the only rightful historic inhabitants of South Africa. Or we can hear similar defenses put forward by the European settlers of Israel, who claim that much of the Palestinian land and buildings they occupy are rightfully theirs, since the Arabs had allegedly decided to voluntarily abandon it all during the 1948-49 war. Are these kinds of tales any less preposterous than those put forward by Euro-American settlers? America was spacious and sparsely populated only because the European invaders destroyed whole civilizations and killed off millions of Native Americans to get the land and profits they wanted. We all know that when the English arrived at Virginia, for example, they encountered an urban, village-dwelling society far more skilled than they were in the arts of medicine, agriculture, fishing, and government. This civilization was reflected in a chain of 300 Indian nations and peoples stretching from the Arctic Circle to the tip of South America, many of whom had highly developed societies. There was, in fact, a greater population in these Indian nations in 1492 than in all of Western Europe. Recent scholarly estimates indicate that at the time of Columbus, there were 100 million Indians in the hemisphere, 10 million in North America, 25 million in central Mexico, and an additional 65 million elsewhere in Central and South America. These numbers have long been concealed since they give rise to the logical question of what happened to this great mass of people. The European invaders, Spanish, Dutch, English, Portuguese, and French, simply killed off millions and millions to safeguard their conquest of the land and provide the disposable slave labor they needed to launch their new world. Conservative Western historical estimates show that the Spanish reduced, in quotes, the Indian population of their colonies from some 50 million to only 4 million by the end of the 17th century. And from the 10 million Indians who once inhabited North America, after 4 centuries of settler invasion and rule, there were in 1900 perhaps 200,000 to 300,000 surviving descendants in the United States. This was the very substantial down payment towards the continuing blood price that third world nations have to pay to sustain the Euro-American way of life. So when we hear that the settlers pushed out the Indians or forced the Indians to leave their traditional hunting grounds, we know that these are just code phrases to refer politely to the most barbaric genocide imaginable. It could well be the greatest crime in all of human history. Only here, the Adolf Eichmanns and Heinrich Himmlers had names like Benjamin Franklin and Andrew Jackson. The point is that genocide was not an accident, not an excess, not the unintended side effect of virile European growth. Genocide was the necessary and deliberate act of the capitalists and their settler shock troops. The book Settlers. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
By Naomi Klein.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you live from Chicago. We're at the Union Hall of Sheet Metal Workers Smart 265. We have with us Jim Allen, the president of the Bricklayers, Lou Cairo, who is a senior partner at GWC Personal Injury Law, John Daniel, the business manager at Sheet Metals Workers at Smarts 265, and a special tip of the hat to the folks who helped sponsor this whole event here, which includes Smart 265, the Sheet Metal Workers, the BACADC District 1 Bricklayers and Allied Craft Workers, GWC Personal Injury Law, the Operating Engineers Local 399, the Painters District Council 14, and Stars and Stripes Screen Printing. And thank you to all of you. And also to Frugal Muse Books and Darian, who dropped by and have my new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America here. It's which I'd be glad to sign when we're all done and autograph your books for you. And they have some of our other books and other books here as well. We've been talking about impeachment. We've been talking about the politics of the day. We're going to get into some labor issues as well. I want to do a deep dive on some of those issues. There is breaking news, though. Mitt Romney. This speaks to the conversation that we had in the last hour about what's going to happen when the Republicans start jumping ship. Mitt Romney just tweeted this. It was 2 tweets back-to-back 12 minutes ago. By all appearances, the president's brazen and unprecedented appeal to China and to Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden is wrong and appalling. And that was the first one. Then his second tweet he followed on. He said, when the only American citizen President Trump singles out for China's investigation is his political opponent in the midst of a Democratic nomination process, it strains credulity to suggest that it is anything other than politically motivated. So there you go.
A Republican who's honest?
There's your first Republican.
It's a pretty
senator.
strong statement.
It's a very strong statement. Of course, Mitt Romney, wants to run for president. He's
ready to jump in the race.
24. Yeah, this is Mitt Romney tossing his hat into the ring for 6 years from now, or 5.5 years from now. I'm convinced, but so that's going on, and there's another piece of interesting news out that I just wanted to mention real quick. I did this story on this program at some length a couple of weeks ago. In fact, it seems like now it's almost been a month that, or maybe even a little longer, that there was the first whistleblower had got virtually no attention, and it wasn't the intelligence service whistleblower, it was the Treasury whistleblower, somebody who works at the IRS. And this whistleblower said that somebody is messing with the president's tax returns, the IRS, in a way to basically conceal information or modify information. I mean, we just don't know. And Richard Neal is the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. There is black letter law, actual law that says, and this was passed back in the 1920s, around Teapot Dome scandal, that the president may see, that the chair of the House Ways and Means Committee, that one person, nobody in the Senate, nobody else in the House, the one, because House Ways and Means is what basically controls the money in the House, that the chair of the House Ways and Means Committee has the legal right, simply upon request, to see any of the president's tax returns for as long as he wants. All he has to do is request, and the IRS shall deliver them to that person. Now, it doesn't give him the right to publicize them, but it does give him the right to examine them. Richard Neal is the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. He has subpoenaed those tax records. Steve Mnuchin, the head of the Treasury Department, the Treasury Secretary, has said, no, we're not going to do it. The IRS commissioner, he used to be one of Trump's tax lawyers, has said, no, we ain't going to do it, and in naked violation of the law. But Richard Neal, the Democratic chair of the House Ways and Means Committee, has not been yelling and screaming the way that Adam Schiff has over in intelligence and kind of highlighting this fact. Well, this apparently has got the whistleblower so angry, so upset, so freaked out that the whistleblower has now gotten in touch with the Washington Post and is leaking this stuff to the Washington Post. And the Washington Post is now, talking about this. It's in fact from the Post. He filed a formal complaint, sent it to the tax committee chairs in both houses of Congress, including Chuck Grassley, and to the Treasury Department Inspector General for Tax Administration. And this was on July 29th. Now, he's not talking about the substance of the complaint with the Washington Post. That would be a crime. But he is trying to highlight the complaint itself. That he would become a leaker if he did that. So far, he's just a whistleblower. But keep an eye on this space. So we'll see where all of this goes. So a lot going on. It's just amazing. We have a member of the audience. We're here in Chicago with a live studio audience, as it were, and we have a roving microphone. If people have individual questions for me or for any of the members of the panel or for all four of us, go for it, sir. Tell us your name and where you're from, or at least your first name.
Carl Gabay, and I'm actually with the Illinois Retired Teachers Association. But
good on you.
I think we've all been very frustrated in watching the hearings, and you're right about these things being turned into a circus. Now, what can we effectively do, or can something be done to punish these characters who don't even show up for the hearings? I can't imagine if Hillary Clinton had defied the Republicans when she had to answer, had to go there 11 hours to answer questions about her emails. I mean, this is something that's very, very frustrating, I think, to all of us, the fact that there's such defiance there that something's got to be done to punish these characters, to put them into place.
There are, I'll answer this, and then if any of you guys want to jump in, just let me know. There are basically three kinds of contempt that Congress can use against a recalcitrant witness. The first is what is typically done, and that's civil contempt. And that's basically where Congress sues the person who doesn't show up. That then goes into the court system, directly into the federal court system. And in fact, speaking of Hillary Clinton, during the Obama administration, his attorney general refused to testify before Congress. He showed up, but there were some things that he would not testify to. The Republicans sued him. And that case was not, the final adjudication of that case didn't happen until after Donald Trump was sworn in. So that can take several years. The second way that they can do it is with criminal contempt. With criminal contempt, they would say, okay, what you are in contempt of Congress in a way that constitutes a crime. And the problem with criminal contempt is that the criminal, what's the word, Lou? The criminal complaint?
The indictment?
It has to be referred to Bill Barr, right? To the
Attorney General.
Yeah, to the Attorney General. So that criminal complaint has to be referred to the Department of Justice, which prosecutes people And Bill Barr has made it fairly clear that he ain't doing nothing. So criminal contempt could, also be slow. And then there's this third one called inherent contempt, which is what the House of Representatives used from the founding of the Republic up until around the 1920s. And with inherent contempt, the House can have the Sergeant at Arms of the House actually, frog march somebody into. They've used committee rooms, they've used meeting rooms. They used to have a sort of a jail cell in the basement. Right now, it's where Lincoln's hearse is stored. But it's been so long since that's happened, and it was never challenged when it happened in the past. So it's never been adjudicated. It's never been brought before the Supreme Court to determine if this is the proper mechanism. And there's a lot of doubt whether the House will use inherent contempt or whether trying to do that will just tie it up again. So, in the past, like when the Supreme Court, and this is where it's going to get real interesting, the Supreme Court said to Richard Nixon, Nixon said, I'm not going to turn over the tapes, right? It wasn't John Dean, what was it, Richard Kleindienst, I think, said there's this tape system, and Congress subpoenaed the tapes, and Nixon said no. And so they kicked it immediately to the Supreme Court as a civil lawsuit. And the Supreme Court immediately said, Nixon, you got to turn them over. Now, you got people like Roger Stone, who is saying today, had Nixon simply burned the tapes, he would have been good. And that was an option that Nixon had. I mean, it would have been illegal, but so we'll see if Nixon actually still had some honor. He still had some respect for our system. I don't think that's the case with Trump. So that's my take on the options. We'll get everybody else's when we come back. Stick around. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We're live from Chicago at the Smart 265 Union Hall. Want to comment on this?
I'll defer to
Lou. You're the lawyer.
Yeah, we'll defer to Lou.
I think you did a pretty good job explaining the law. I mean, it's an obstruction of justice, basically, type of a criminal prosecution. But criminal contempt has its pitfalls, and the civil contempt, I would think, would be a waste of time. I mean, I think the criminal contempt is a better route to go. I'm not a criminal lawyer, though. But, I mean, if you've got a lawful subpoena and you're commanded to show up and you don't show up, you're going to be subject to an obstruction under a contempt proceeding.
What are the penalties for contempt?
Well, if it's civil, they can. It's a fine. In a civil case, they can just require you to do. They could require you to say what they need to say, or provide the documentation that they were demanding, or give the testimony, or there's money damages, which means nothing to these people. It's a criminal one because they'll basically put you in jail until you're ready to testify,
right.
And that happens with people all the time. I mean, we hear about those types of situations where somebody's underling doesn't want to testify against a higher up, so they put them in jail until they're willing to talk. And there's people that have sat in jail for 2 years, not for committing a crime, but for refusing to obey a subpoena.
I remember during the Clinton impeachment hearings that they wanted to get Susan McDougal, who was part of the Whitewater investment plan where everybody lost money. They wanted to bring her in and have her testify against Bill Clinton. And she was given the questions in advance, and she said, these are loaded questions. They imply things that are not true. I am not going to respond to these questions. They threw her in jail, and she spent 2 years in prison. Why is it that she ended up in prison during the Clinton impeachment hearings, and Corey Lewandowski goes before Congress, flips them the bird, bends over and moons them, and nothing happens?
Don't ask me, because there's no legal reason for it. It's just it's a different generation.
I think it's Bill Barr.
Well,
I think the Attorney General during the Clinton impeachment was actually willing to hold somebody accountable, even though he was a Democrat. He was appointed by Clinton. I don't recall who it was, but I think the Attorney General was willing to proceed with an actual contempt hearing.
Well, Bill Clinton wasn't one of those presidents that made it very well known, or even secretly or out in the open, that there will be reprisals. If you go against me on anything, I will ruin your career. I mean, Trump has made that very clear. So if you're Bill Barr, you're going to be replaced tomorrow.
Right.
I mean, Trump has no problem taking people out of his cabinet, right? I mean, Sessions, you're going to recuse yourself on this Russian thing. You're gone. I mean,
well, it wasn't you're gone. I mean, for months he was trashing his reputation. Yeah. He was trashing his parenthood.
He's hoping he would change his opinion and come back into the fold and do what he was supposed to do. But I'm sure Bill Barr. I mean, I'm not going to cast aspersions on the guy. People have
well, I will.
But
in
good, I set you up good.
In my new book, shameless plug.
And you have.
In my new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, turn to page 118 if you have a copy of the book, and you will find 4 pages about Bill Barr that I wrote a year and a half ago when I first started writing the book. And this is from 1992. Bill Barr was the Attorney General in 1992 for George Herbert Walker Bush. Lawrence Walsh was the special prosecutor on Iran-Contra. He had nailed this thing. He had already gotten a guilty conviction. He had already convicted Caspar Weinberger. He had already convicted Ollie North. He had already convicted Elliot Abrams. He had 3 more people who were on the docket, and they were all looking at serious jail time. And the thing that Walsh had finally found was that Bush Sr., the president, had a diary which had in it the proof that he was complicit in the Iran-Contra scam to hold the hostages back in 1980. Bill Barr recommended that he pardon all 6 of those people. He did. And Christmas Eve, 1992, the New York Times headline, screaming headline, massive cover-up, Lawrence Walsh claims cover-up. Bill Barr did that. He shut it down.
Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. See, in fact,
here at Chicago. There we go. And so we have a for some reason my audio is not working right. I don't know what the there we go. Okay, we have a question from the audience.
Tom. I got some information. I don't remember where it came from when we were talking about this case with the IRS trying to get his records. Right. That already went to federal court. And it was one of the judges heard the case that Trump put on the bench, said they're going to delay it until after the election. So
it doesn't surprise me.
I mean, I may be wrong, but you could check it out and see if I'm correct.
My understanding is that Donald Trump has now appointed more federal judges than any president in the history of the republic, and I think that the reason why they keep trying to kick things into the federal court system and ultimately to the Supreme Court is because he thinks they've got his backside covered. So
exactly.
Yeah.
My other comment or question is we need to educate people out there. Part of the problem with all of this is most of the public isn't educated. Now we have a progressive radio station that's putting this on. We go to Florida, we can't get a progressive radio station. We can't get one in Georgia. We can't get one in Tennessee.
Right.
Now, we got Republicans out there. Mitt Romney, for example, went out and bought up 121, I believe, radio stations.
No, that was Clear Channel was bought by Bain Capital, Mitt Romney's company. At the time, they owned over 900 radio stations.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Why can't we convince some of these Democratic billionaires like Tom Steyer?
I wrote an op-ed specifically addressing to Tom Steyer and saying, why don't you consider doing this? Now, I just don't think he's that rich. But the fact of the matter is that the Republicans have built a very formidable right-wing infrastructure, and it's a solid one. Thank you for the call. I want to get to IRAPs. This I want to just shift rather suddenly, I suppose, but to labor, because I think this is a piece of this whole thing. We being working people in the United States, we are subject to a war on labor that Ronald Reagan declared, out front, right in front of all of us back in 1981 when he fired the Patco workers, and then continued. And he was basically following on what Margaret Thatcher had done in '78, or actually early '79 when she became prime minister, and she fired or broke up the coal miners union in the UK, which was the strongest union, arguably one of the strongest unions in the whole world. And she succeeded, and Reagan thought, okay, we're going to follow that playbook. And the way that people are designated as employees or not employees is actually a big deal. It's a huge deal. And with Trump trying to put Antonin Scalia's son on the head of the Labor Department, I mean, frankly, I think this is an impeachable offense. But John, John Daniel, the business manager for Smart 265, you know a lot about this stuff. You want to break this down in plain English that everybody can understand?
The IRAP specifically, we can talk about for sure. So the IRAP...
that is maybe I don't have my acronyms.
Yeah,
right.
so
Okay.
You talked a little bit about misclassification.
Misclassification, yeah.
Sure, and then the IRAPs is a different... it's all labor, right?
Okay.
And it's all an attack on labor collectively.
Yeah.
So we'll peel them back a little bit separately.
So let's talk about misclassification first.
So misclassification of workers. Typically, in a traditional real business, you have employees, right? You have people that come, they fill out a W-2, they fill out applications. They're a taxable employee that you should take care of, provide insurance for, and a fair wage. But you're taxed. You're an employee. You pay workers' comp. You pay unemployment insurance, federal taxes, Social Security, Medicare, and so on. What happens in a misclassification environment is a legitimate employer that's competing against a non-legitimate employer. A non-legitimate employer may do the same business, let's say the sheet metal industry that I'm in. So I've got a legitimate company that has employees that's competing against an illegitimate company that hires subcontractors. So from the public perspective, they all look, both companies look like they have employees. They show up in work shirts that identify them as employees of the company. They do the same tasks on the directive of the owner. And they get paid. The difference between a legitimate company that pays taxes, Medicare, Social Security, workers' comp, all of the infrastructure that it takes to survive in our society, compared to the non-legitimate employer, is the non-legitimate employer 1099s all of its employees. He identifies them as a subcontractor, and that's illegal. It's unethical. It's against the law. Just by identifying your employees as a 1099 employee, even though they're working under your directive, there's a 30% savings right off the top by 1099ing them, by identifying them as a independent contractor. So it's a huge problem throughout the country. It's becoming more relevant in the state of Illinois. I believe the southern states, Texas, some of the rural areas, it's not uncommon for an illegitimate contractor to drive by the hardware store in the morning. I need 6 of you. You look kind of strong. We're going to lay some brick today. Jump in the truck. You're my employees. Put this shirt on. I'm going to give you a check for $100 a day, and I'm going to 1099 you at the end of the year. And that's the problem that building trades collectively with misclassification of workers is trying to fight.
And Jim Allen, you've got experience with this. I want to get to you on the other side of this break here, and we'll talk about that. And then we'll get back to IRAPs, as I need to learn my labor acronyms. I'm sorry here, John. John Daniel, Jim Allen, Lou Cairo, Thom Hartmann here with you live from Chicago. We're at the Smart 265's Union Hall with WCPT. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
But we're not taking calls today. We've got a studio audience with us. We'll be back with more right after this.
Our book today is It Came From Something Awful, How a Toxic Troll Army Accidentally Memed Donald Trump into Office by Dale Barron. This is from the introduction. On a warm summer day some 13 years ago, I found myself in the frigid air of Baltimore's Convention Center attending Octocon, a gathering of otaku superfans of Japanese media, mainly anime and manga. I didn't particularly like anime. I felt I was a little too old for the event. I'd attended a few times when I was in high school in the late 90s, Back then, it had been held in a set of hotel conference rooms darkened to play obscure animation taped off Japanese TV. But in recent years, the crowds had grown big enough to require the city's largest venue, and the event had evolved, too, into an elaborate festival where otherwise isolated suburban kids came to bond over their favorite TV shows. And he goes through a fairly lengthy description of the convention center and whatnot. And he says, for this reason, entering into the cool, safe bubble of Octagon, where adolescents attempted to commune with the comforting kids' fantasy on the other side of the screen, felt slightly unsettling to me, though I couldn't put my finger on why. And at a certain point, wandering the triangle-shaped halls lined with wooden ships trapped in bottles, handing out flyers for my webcomic to teens dressed as rubber monsters, things started to get weird. Not for me then. I hardly knew what I was seeing then. But for all of us, now. Years later, I realized I had become an indifferent witness to a turning point in history, a vast secret hinge upon which world events would swing. What did I see? Well, more of the same. Kids in costumes. At the front of one room, there was a 15-year-old boy with a sharp chin, golden locks, and a baseball cap, going through a PowerPoint presentation that was a mixture of web statistics and lewd jokes mocking various types of pornography. These included many fan-drawn images of the boy himself, depicted as a curvaceous pink cartoon cat girl wearing white panties. As the increasingly silly Photoshop drawings slid by, the raucous crowd shouted words of encouragement, gearing up for the late-night techno dance party that would follow. Despite all the adulation, the boy seemed slightly ill at ease. The cap was slung a little too low, as if to disguise his eyes, and he let his friends at the table do most of the talking. This was one of the first meetings of the now infamous online message board, 4chan.org. The boy in the cap was the site's founder, Christopher Moot Pohl. In October 2003, bored and in need of porno, he had programmed 4chan on a whim to trade pictures of anime girls with his friends, but soon discovered thousands and eventually millions of other people wanted to use it. It seems ridiculous to say the site was important, but even more ridiculous is as important as already documented in the history books. In Alt America, David Newart wrote that the Nazi-worshipping alt-right began with 4chan, where people were talking online about Japanese anime. Few of these books, including Newart's, offer an explanation for how this could have possibly happened. How we got from anime otaku to the anime Nazis of 2016 and onward. How all of this resulted in internet weirdos marching with tiki torches and similar fantasy-themed costumes in Charlottesville in 2017. Of course, the kids in that room weren't Nazis, far from it. The last thing they wanted to do was discuss politics. And at that moment, I certainly didn't feel as though I was present for some great turning point in history. In fact, it seemed like I was confronting yet another moment of anti-history, as the vast landscape of the American suburban nowhere land was imported into the convention center, a place that, in its expanse of smooth, clean carpeting, model ships, and big tumbling geometric shapes, felt a little like an infinite kids' rec room. The teens weren't trying to make a mark in the world, they were trying to escape from it by pantomiming discarded scraps of fiction. However, looking back, it all reads like some crazy premonition. As the microphone was passed from rubber dinosaur to trench coat mafia kid to sea witch to ask their curly-headed leader questions, the teens/monsters kept debating and joking about things called memes and trolls. In the mid-2000s, these terms were meaningless to anyone outside the room. But later they broke out of that room and saturated every inch of the world. And stranger still, from 2016 onward, memes and trolls became central concepts that obsessed political commentators. Almost overnight, the terms invaded the domain of world leaders and redefined the contest between them. Now there are Russian trolls, Facebook trolls, and of course, the original 4chan trolls, all jiggling through the ether. Back then, I was surprised to find that I knew what these terms meant. Before I encountered 4chan at Octagon, the site constantly popped up in my webcomics referral logs, the data that shows where people came from when they visit your site. When 4chan began, it wasn't all that different from other online message boards. It was a place to post content and talk to people on the internet. At the time, it imported a few innovations from Japanese sites, which accounted for some of its popularity. It was easy to post images, And following a Japanese custom, it didn't require the user to sign up for an account. Anyone could post under a default name, which eventually became the name of all 4chan users, Anonymous. But this hardly explained why it ballooned so rapidly, why almost as soon as it appeared, people began gathering to celebrate it. The book, It Came From Something Awful by Dale Byrne.
And welcome back from Chicago. Thom Hartmann here with you live. We're with a great panel here at Smart 265, the Sheet Metal Workers Labor Hall, with John Daniel, Jim Allen, and Louis Cairo. And been talking about all kinds of stuff. There is breaking news. This is CNN just broke this literally minutes ago. Kurt Volker, who was the former U.S. Special Envoy to Ukraine, testified behind closed doors yesterday to the, I believe it was the House Intelligence Committee, and perhaps both. In any case, what he testified to, apparently, according to CNN, was that he went to the president and said, this new government, this Zelensky government, this new government in Ukraine actually is committed to cleaning up corruption in Ukraine. They're our friends, our being the United States of America, not necessarily the Trump for president campaign. They're our friends, they're on our side, we need to work together with them. And the problem that he ran up against was that, we talked on the air yesterday about this, that Rudy Giuliani, I'll let back up a little bit. The guy who called Congress into special session yesterday and said, I've got some documents that you've got to see. Those documents, and it was initially reported that it was a bunch of crazy conspiracy stuff. Well, that's exactly what it was. But the thing is, this was stuff that was being handed to the president by Rudy Giuliani. It was being handed to Trump. And it suggested that Ukraine was actually responsible for trying to defeat Trump in the 2016 election. And which is just pure fantasy. So Volker was trying to tell Trump that that was the case, and this from the CNN report. Volker said that Trump was skeptical of Ukraine's leadership, which he said was understandable given the country's history of corruption, but he also added that the president said that Ukraine, quote, tried to take me down, a reference to unproven allegations that Ukraine was involved in the 2016 election meddling. So apparently what Volker is saying is that, we've got a loose cannon in the White House. He's believing stuff that's not true. It's being fed to him by Fox News and Breitbart and Rudy Giuliani. And the Giuliani's right in the middle of this absolute crazy train. And Trump is buying it hook, line, and sinker, which, frankly, I think is putting us all at risk. So anyhow, back to a couple of labor issues here. I do want to get to the apprenticeship program. We'll get back to John Daniel on this. But Jim Allen, you're the president of the bricklayers, basically, here. And this is a big deal for you guys. An employer, the law says that if somebody works for you and you control where they work, when they work, the conditions of their work, you have the ability to basically punish them if they don't do it right or reward them if they do it well. You compensate them. They are an employee. Right. They are not an independent contractor. It's not like I just, called up the local plumbing company and said, come out and fix the thermostat in my house. That's hiring a contractor. Yeah. But if I hired somebody if I had a really fancy house and I hired somebody to work in my house every day all year long making sure my plumbing worked, he would be an employee. And this misclassification is being used to basically rip off workers and enrich employers. You want to give us more detail on that?
That's exactly it. You gave the exact definition of what an employee is. So what the criminal contractor, and I call them criminals because that's what they are, they will say, let's say I got 40 employees. I bring in 40 guys. I tell them, well, what's your Social Security number? A lot of them are illegal, even if they're not. They give me a phony Social Security number. I'm covered. That's what he gave me, right? So then they go to work. They work 52 weeks out of the year, and I give them a a 1099 for maybe $80, $90, maybe even $100,000. You know what they pay into the government? Nothing, because it's a phony Social Security they gave anyway, so no one's going to come and get you. So they go and work and make $100,000, undermine every legitimate contractor, whether you're union or non-union. They're undermining them by at least 30%, and they're stealing the work from everybody that everyone in this room, myself included, and at the panel, we all pay taxes. These people don't. They're all misclassified. So what do they do next year? They walk in, give them another phony Social Security number. Play the game over and over. The bricklayers actually got a lot of documentation from guys that used to do this, and then they became union. We went to the IRS. We gave them testimony after testimony files. And, you know, it wasn't just paper chase. It was very documented stuff with their 1099s about different contractors. They never did a thing. IRS did nothing. And that was 10 years ago. We had a big article that was written about it in the Sun-Times in 2009. That's how long ago it was. Wow. And we do have misclassification rules that actually Blagojevich, that's how far it was, that he passed, or we got it passed, and he signed it into law, but nothing's been done. Now, we do have a new attorney general, and we are going to work closely with him. He's promised to do something about it.
This is in Illinois.
In Illinois, Kwame Raoul is the attorney general.
Is this principally a state-level problem or a federal problem?
Well, you know what, it's federal because you're not getting any taxes from the federal, the state, or anything, but this is U.S.-wide. It's every state. I can go to every state in the country, and this is what they're doing, and it's a huge problem. And it's killing our contractors because we cannot. If I was a non-union contractor, I still can't compete because I'm paying workman's comp and Social Security and unemployment, all the stuff that every legitimate contractor takes on all of us. These people get away with it. So,
and it's not even just some full-time worker who's making $100,000. It could be somebody who's working for 3 or 4 months.
Right.
And walking away with $10,000.
Right, exactly.
And, but still, it's
Yeah, it doesn't matter how long. I'm just guessing that if they're working 52 weeks out of the year, they might be making $70,000, $80,000, $90,000. So it's really and I used to say it, every day you go by and someone's robbing the bank and you see it and they're all walking out with the money, you call the police and they just drive by and don't do a thing. That's what's been going on with misclassification. Nobody has done a thing in Springfield or the rest of the country, and it's criminal, and they've done studies. It's costing hundreds of millions of dollars in tax revenue. Yeah. And obviously in the state of Illinois, we could use some tax revenue. I'm going to pass the hat around the audience a little later. But, yeah, so we definitely need that.
Yeah. So, Lou, as the lawyer here, if an employer is misclassifying their employees and saying that they're and by the way, for people who as a frame to understand this is the big battle around Google, or not Google, Uber. Right
Uber.
Now. Uber is saying that the people who drive for them are actually not employees. And yet, both federal labor law and the labor law of most states says that, if you can tell somebody when and where to work, and they say we're getting around this because they can clock on and clock off whenever they want. But that's a very fine distinction. And California is trying to close that loophole right now. But this is not just Uber. I mean, this is and not just bricklayers. This is right across the country. Yeah. What is the process for holding people accountable? What kind of penalties are available for this?
Well, here's the problem, and I see this a ton in the trucking industry. I mean, you see these big trucks going down the street, big 18-wheelers. They've got 50,000 pounds of cargo in there. If you stop the trucker and you have a conversation with them, half the time they don't speak English. They don't have a real Social Security card. They do not work for the company whose name's all over the side of the vehicle. I've got a case where an 83-year-old woman was walking across the street, broad daylight. Guy had made a left-hand turn, ran her over, dragged her half a block, killed her.
Ouch.
He's driving one of those big Amazon vans. It's 2 days before Christmas, and he's got a deadline to meet. Okay, because he's got to deliver all these.
This is literally Amazon.
This is it's a van that says Amazon on it.
On the side.
Okay? And all he does is delivers Amazon packages. We are now 2.5 years into litigation, and we are flying in people from Amazon, and they're giving deps, and they're saying their mantra is, and the law supports them, in terms of what they're saying, is these people are just independent contractors. They don't work for us. I mean, they can do whatever they want to do. We say they have to have a van like this. We say they have to put our Amazon sign on it, and we give them the sign to put on there. They have all the control in the world, and that's the legal threshold. Is if you have an indicia of control, where you control the means, the manners, the methods of their employment, you provide them with the tools, the equipment, you give them the supervision, then you're an employer. I don't really care what you have them sign. Okay, so you can become the employer, and we will prove that this individual was, quote unquote, an employee, or at least had a sufficient indicia of control by Amazon. I'm pretty confident we'll prevail in this regard. But it happens in 18-wheelers. We always get these people. They're from Czechoslovakia, they're from Bosnia, they're from these Middle Eastern countries, or Eastern European countries rather, and people are getting destroyed by the vehicles, and they have to have $1 million policy, and that's all they have. Now you think, well, you see FedEx, money's not an issue. UPS, money's not an issue, right? Because I don't care what their policy is. These are billion-dollar corporations. You see a semi go down the street with a beautiful sign, and it said whatever the sign on the side of it is, there's no assets. It's literally that truck driver's truck that he leases. He has no money.
Just to make this clear, if I'm the victim of somebody who's not a legal employee, whether they build my house in a way that it falls apart, or whether they ran over me with a truck, really the only person I can sue is that individual. Who may well be judgment proof, right, and I get nothing.
You have no recourse against an employer.
Whereas if they were the actual employee, which they should be by law, then I could go back against their employer who put them in that circumstance.
Right. The individual driver or operator is responsible, as well as the corporation he's working for, and that's where you get corporate responsibility rather than being screwed.
We got about 15 seconds before I hit a break. How do you think this is going to play out? Is there an effort to change these laws or to strengthen these laws?
They've been doing it for years, and they'll continue to do it for years. If they can get away with it, they're going to get away with it.
Yeah, this is corporate America at its worst.
Yep.
It really is. I want to get into apprenticeships also. One of the really cool things that labor provides all across the country is the ability to get into a workplace, work your way up through the workplace, and get skills. We're going to talk about that with John Daniel, the business manager of Smart Local 265, in just a minute. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. We're live from Chicago.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be right back from Chicago, WCPT. So we have a person with a question here. Hi.
Hi, my name's Barb Lloyd. I actually am working with a group that's trying to change independent contractor status with Uber and Lyft. We're working with the state and the city to come up with something similar to AB5 in California. Our statistics are showing across the country that it's about 40% of the labor force right now fits into that independent or misclassified worker.
Whoa.
And within the next 10 years, we're looking at 60 to 75% across all corporations. And so I guess my question for you in the labor movement is, are you also approaching the governors across the country trying to get this changed? Because these companies, Uber is here now attacking trucking, service industry labor. They're also going to get into replacement labor for job sites all across the way. And this is, they pay really well up front and then screw the workers on the follow-up.
Jim?
Yeah, you know what? I just had a meeting.
This is Jim Allen, Bricklayers President.
We had a meeting with our international, and New Jersey got up and talked about a new law that they do have in New Jersey that the governor just signed, where they actually will walk into an employer's office, and if he can't prove that those construction workers are being paid correctly, not that they're union or non-union, but whether they're taking out the Social Security, unemployment, they will shut the job down. And when you throw those numbers out that you just throw out, think about, everyone talks about Social Security, underfunding of Social Security. Look at all those hours that nobody gets Social Security paid into on all these criminal employers. And it's mind-boggling. If you added it up, it's millions and millions of dollars that should be going into Social Security, just that alone, and we should all be worried about that.
If I can add one thing in that time, in addition to the fact, Jimmy, that Social Security is not getting the hundreds of millions of dollars that they should be getting for contributions for the labor, when those individuals get hurt, or first of all, when they're not working, they don't get unemployment compensation, so how do they support their families? And if they get hurt, they don't get workers' compensation, so they go on the public aid system or on the Medicare system. So not only are our tax dollars being lost in the Social Security Department, our tax dollars are being expended more rapidly in Medicare and in public aid assistance, because these people have no insurance. These employers don't provide health insurance for them. You don't get your rights under the Illinois Workers' Compensation Act or whatever state you're in. So really the government, us as taxpayers, we get whacked on both ends.
Yeah, we had one of our contractors that was non-union. The guy actually fell off the scaffold. They wouldn't call an ambulance. They dragged him, put him off the property, and called one of his friends, said, "Come and get your guy."
Yeah, and that really happens.
And then we were on the job site, and they didn't speak English. We have Polish interpreters and organizers, so they knew what happened, but they actually dragged him off the job site just so that, because he's not insured.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And presumably then he also doesn't have workman's comp.
No, he's got nothing.
Yeah. And if this is 40%, if her number is right, if this is 40%
scary.
of our workforce, that's not hundreds of millions. That's
Yeah.
tens to hundreds of billions of dollars and going into Social Security, into Medicare, that is hurting the entire system, weakening the entire system.
Tommy, you said corporate state, and I really think that definition, that phrase, that really defines the problem. I think we got to take some of these employers that are manipulating our immigration system, that are bringing these desperate people to increase their quality of life, and we need to lock some of those people up.
Yeah, go after the employers. Yeah, it's so sad that we're going after the employers. We'll be right back.
Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. Just available to people, members of.
And welcome back from live from Chicago. We're in the Union Hall here of Smart 265, the sheet metal workers. We have John Daniel, business manager, Jim Allen, the president of the Bricklayers, and Lou Cairo, the senior partner at GWC Personal Injury Law. And this is brought to you by the sheet metal workers, the Bricklayers and Allied Craft Workers, BACADC District 1, the GWC Personal Injury Law, the Operating Engineers Local 399, Painters District Council 14, and Stars and Stripes Screen Printing. John, I blew it on my recollection of what this acronym meant. Tell us about apprenticeships. And what the unions have been doing for years and years. I mean, my dad worked in a union shop, and we've had this conversation before. And in fact, one of my brothers started at least going through an apprenticeship as a tool and die maker. He didn't finish it out and ended up in the IBEW instead. But I've seen these things. I've seen them in my own family. It's somebody with a high school diploma can come in and after a year or 2 years or 3 years or whatever become a journeyman and have a good solid pay and a union job. What's the status of this? I know that the Labor Department, the Federal Department of Labor, actually regulates at a certain level how this stuff all works. What's going on?
So currently the Department of Labor has oversight over accredited apprenticeship programs. So let me slow down just a little bit on the definition of apprenticeship programs. So apprenticeship programs are a jointly administered labor and management trust fund. The members and the contractors, when we negotiate our wages and benefits, at some point the members will take a deferral from their what could be put on their check, and they invest into a training program. So the building that we're here today, we're a 28,000 square foot building, and the majority of this building is for training, and it's private dollars that our members have deferred to invest into our own future.
It's kind of a pay it forward thing.
Absolutely. It's the right thing to do. All right. Who better can train us on how to do what we do than ourselves? And we invest in ourselves privately with deferred wages so that we can protect who we are and pass our skills on to my kids and our members' kids and anyone else that wants to be part of our organization. So our current program, and it's not dissimilar from the majority of them, we have a 5-year apprenticeship program. So our apprentices come in. They come in for a solid week, 40 hours straight, once every 10 weeks. So they come in 5 times per year. The other 9 weeks that they're not in school, they're on the job. That's where 90% of their training comes from, is on-the-job training. So we have mentors on the job site, people that have been through the apprenticeship program, people that carry the tools, that have been through OSHA training for safety, that really have been given the skill set to be a productive employee so the employer can go out and make more money. All right, that's the deal that we have with them. That's the agreement, the relationship that we have with our employers. So they come to school for 5 years, and when they turn out, become a journey person. We're rebranding the Journeyman name because we're trying to be more inclusive as an organization. So when you turn out as a journey person, you have the skills to survive and provide for your family in a transient workforce. Now, a lot of people don't understand when I say a transient workforce. So you may work for XYZ contractor today, and maybe that contractor starts to slow down because another contractor has a more competitive bid to build the next building. Well, I really don't care who gets the next building as long as one of our signatory employers, and we're going to provide them the workforce to do the next job. So through that transient workforce, we provide the nucleus of a human resource piece for our contractor group. So we maintain our health and welfare for our membership. Regardless of who they work for, we're that human resource branch of a contractor to create a stable workforce with security and a long-term plan on how to provide for their families.
And what's the deal now, particularly with Mr. Scalia's son coming out of the Labor Department?
So one of the slicker attacks, I suppose, they're trying to undermine the oversight of the Department of Labor. So they come in and audit us annually. They make sure that we're recruiting to disenfranchised areas where we have a certain percentage of minorities. We don't hand pick and cherry pick who's entered into our program. There's all kinds of regulations and rules that we have to abide by, and they've created the society of organized labor that we have today. And we've invested millions and millions of dollars into our training and making sure that we follow these guidelines so that we have a solid, safe, skilled, trained workforce when they go out on the job site. The federal government, the Department of Labor, I would say Donald Trump, but has decided that let's look at the idea of shifting the oversight from the Department of Labor, who manages our infrastructure now, and let's just give it to industry. Let's just say that XYZ contractor, you're in the industry, why don't you have oversight over the apprenticeship program and undercut everything that we've done for this local, our international was established in 1888. So for north of 100 years, we've had this Department of Labor oversight. We've built this integrity, and just in a stroke of a pen, they want to change that oversight from the Department of Labor that makes sure that we market correctly, we train correctly, we meet these standards so that you can say that you are a qualified sheet metal worker. Just give it to the employer, because the employer is going to do the right thing to make sure that their employees can establish a quality of life.
Don't they always?
Yeah. So it's a slick way to do it. That period has stopped. The comment section for the IRAP has ended. We're expecting to hear something from the Department of Labor sometime in December or January. So it's a wait and see at this point.
Can I add one thing that John? Not a dime of taxpayer money goes into any of our programs, which is amazing. People think that the taxpayers pay for it. Not a dime goes into any of our programs.
Thank you. John Daniel, Jim Allen. We'll be right back from Chicago.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Vince Houghton's Nuking the Moon and Other Intelligence Schemes and Military Plots Left on the Drawing Board. This is Chapter 7, Operation Northwoods. On April 17, 1961, more than 1,400 Cuban exiles forming the Brigada de Asalto 2506 landed on the beaches of Cuba at Playa Girón in the Bahia de Cojinos, the Bay of Pigs. Their mission was to overthrow the regime of Fidel Castro, Cuba's increasingly communist leader, who had himself overthrown the regime of American ally Batista just 2 years before. A communist leader just 90 miles from Key West was a rather painful thorn in the side of the newly inaugurated President John F. Kennedy, and his ouster was considered a high national security priority, as it had been for Kennedy's predecessor, Dwight Eisenhower. The invasion was backed by the U.S. government and the CIA. We can argue why the Bay of Pigs invasion failed until we're blue in the face, and many people still do. For many in the Cuban exile community, the mission failed because JFK refused to give American naval and air support, elements called in for the original plan developed by the Eisenhower administration. Maybe this is true. The problem here is that we begin to descend into the realm of the counterfactuals, the if-onlys and what-ifs, things that we are doing our damnedest to avoid. Look, I've met a lot of the Cubans who took part in that invasion, many of whom are permanently settled in or around Miami, my hometown. They are impressive men, and I wouldn't put anything past them. If they say they could have kicked out Castro with U.S. naval and air support, who am I to argue? But I still will, because things are much more complicated from an intelligence perspective. Despite the lack of air and naval support, and despite the intensity and desire of the Cuban exile forces, it would have been immeasurably difficult to overcome one of the most problematic aspects of the entire invasion. Castro not only knew they were coming, he knew when and where they were coming. A combination of piss-poor information security, or in today's parlance, InfoSec, with the ability of Cuban intelligence to infiltrate the Miami exile community meant that the secret mission to free Cuba of Castro was anything but secret. It's not like this was a huge surprise for the CIA or the U.S. military. The Cuban intelligence service was very good, and some in the exile community had loose lips. In this environment, it was nearly impossible to conduct effective counterintelligence and keep the invasion secret. Most telling of all, the Soviets had literally broadcast their knowledge of the mission 4 days before it happened. On April 13th, Radio Moscow released an English-language newscast in which they predicted an invasion of Cuba by CIA-trained exiles within the week. It seems they were trying to warn us against carrying out the invasion, a type of deterrence through propaganda. Hey, we know you're coming, so perhaps now is not a good time for your secret operation. Clearly, that didn't work. The blowback from the failed mission was significant on multiple levels. More than 100 members of the 2506 Brigade were killed in combat, along with 4 American volunteer pilots from the Alabama Air National Guard, who were contracted by the CIA. Hundreds more in Cuba would be executed in the days and weeks following the invasion, as Castro eliminated anyone suspected of abetting the exiles. More than 1,200 of the brigade would be captured by the Cuban government, and some of those members were subsequently executed. The Kennedy administration was embarrassed by the failed mission. U.S. government looked inept in failing to maintain order even in its own backyard. In the zero-sum game of the Cold War, where victory for one of the superpowers was defeat for the other, this was a huge win for the Soviets. Not to mention that the invasion pushed Castro even more firmly into the Soviet sphere of influence. And as far as the strength of the regime was concerned, the Bay of Pigs invasion did the exact opposite of what was intended. It made Castro's regime more powerful than ever before. The operation was a great political victory for the Cubans at home and abroad. Castro was a hero in the eyes of his people for defeating the Yankee invasion and was able to consolidate his power. The fiasco also elevated the Cuban government to a newfound global status, transforming communist Cuba from a grieved little country to an equal in the eyes of the world. In fact, Argentinian physician turned Cuban revolutionary Ernesto Che Guevara actually thanked the United States for the failed invasion. The CIA bore the brunt of the blame for the failed mission. President Kennedy fired CIA Director Allen Dulles, along with Deputy Director Charles Cabell and Deputy Director for Plans Richard M. Bissell, the 3 men who made up the core of the agency's leadership, particularly in the realm of covert action. Kennedy also removed, at least temporarily, major paramilitary operations from the purview of the CIA. For more than a decade, CIA had been the agency with primary responsibility for paramilitary covert operations. But now it was benched. Into the void leapt the U.S. military. In June 1961, about 2 months after the Bay of Pigs, President Kennedy approved National Security Action Memoranda 55, 56, and 57, which codified the shift in paramilitary responsibility from the CIA to the Pentagon. Nothing else really changed. The U.S. government was still looking for ways to oust Castro from power, just through a different government agency. By autumn, Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations, Brigadier General Edward Lansdale, a legendary intelligence officer, or infamous, or both, depending on your perspective, was asked to brainstorm ideas to get rid of Fidel. He didn't disappoint. In February 1962, Lansdale provided a document titled Possible Actions to Provoke, Harass, or Disrupt Cuba. Some of the actions are pretty good, some are quite silly, and some are downright abhorrent. The book is Nuking the Moon by Vince Houghton. Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Came from Something Awful by Dale Byrne.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back. We're live in Chicago. Broadcast the third hour of our program, broadcasting live from the Sheet Metal Workers Smart 265 Union Headquarters. John Daniel is with us, the business manager of Sheet Workers Smart 265. Jim Allen, the president of the Bricklayers and Allied Craft Workers. Louis Cairo, senior partner with CWG Personal Injury Law and a WCPT legal analyst every month right here on WCPT, Chicago's Progressive Talk, who is also putting this event together. Special thanks to Smart 265. The Sheet Metal Workers, BACADC District 1, the Bricklayers and Allied Craft Workers, the GWC Personal Injury Law, the Operating Engineers Local 399, the Painters District Council number 14, and Stars and Stripes Screen Printing, and Frugal Muse Books, who has brought my books here and maybe some others. I'm not sure. You got quite a pile of them back there for the people, because we have a live studio audience, several hundred people here. Thank you so much for showing up. It's great seeing you all. We also, I end the show every day with democracy begins with you. Get out there, get active, tag, you're it. I've been saying this for 16 years now on the radio, and from time to time people take me up on it, and they take it real seriously. We've got some candidates here: Jim Malone, Lynn Gray, Alice Wilson-Shirky, and Pete Janko. And I want John to introduce two of them who came out of the labor movement. And we're going to have Paul run the microphone over to them. So if you'll just, when you're introduced or your name is called, stand up, and Paul will get the microphone to you and give you just a minute or two. Please do it very, very quickly, because we're going to hit a break in about 8 minutes. But give each one of you a minute to just basically announce your candidacy. So, John, you want to introduce the two that you know?
Yeah, thank you, Tom. So democracy starts now. That's a tagline across building trades. We've been pushing very, very hard, asking our membership to engage in the process. Not just go to the polls and take your family and friends to the polls, but actually become a candidate yourself, because who can have a stronger voice for organized labor than organized labor? So that message has resonated. I got to give a shout out to transportation side of SMART. We've got a member from the transportation side, Matt Hansen, who is a King County board member, and he's running for re-election as well. So the transportation side of SMART is a strong piece of us, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Matt Hassan, who is out on the trains today and couldn't be with us. So another one of our members, a candidate running for Illinois State Rep in District 66. Jim Malone heard that message at our union meetings as we've continued to encourage people to the politics is not a spectator sport, and we need you to engage. So I'd like to introduce Jim Malone, candidate for Illinois State Rep of the 66th District.
And good on you, Jim.
So like John said, my name's Jim Malone. I'm running for state representative in District 66, which is northern Kane County and southern McHenry County. I am a member of Local 265. I've been a member for 28 years. Actually went to apprentice class with John. We sat right next to each other. So I feel that we're not being represented properly in our district. So that's why, like John said, I stepped up. I currently serve on the Board of Trustees for the Village of Carpentersville, and I am a precinct committee person for Dundee 32, and I'm the treasurer of the Dundee Township Democrats.
That's great. That's great. And do you have a website you want to?
I do, jimmalone.com. And we're getting petitions signed, so if anyone lives in northern Kane or southern McHenry, come see me. I'd love to get a signature.
Great. And
Thank
thanks.
you.
And John?
Jim, we're proud of you, and we're going to be there to make sure we get you across the line. The next, we got another member, Lance Gray, that's here today. Now, Lance isn't running himself, but again, we talked about getting your family, friends, neighbors out to vote. Lance Gray's wife, Lynn Gray, is a candidate for McHenry County Board District 5. We're very proud of you, Lynn, and appreciate you running for that spot. Lynn, please.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to address everybody. I am actually pretty new to the political scene. I ran for Recorder of Deeds for McHenry County in 2016. It was an unsuccessful race, and I swore that I would never run again.
But here you are.
Really good friend of mine, Missy Funk, taught me how to canvass, and so I'm a well-versed canvasser. That's what I like to do most, knock on doors and talk to voters. Peter Janko was introduced to me through Missy, and he is the Democratic Central States Committeeman for the 14th District. And so he talked me into running for county board. The decisions that are made locally are the ones that touch us the most in our family life, our everyday life. And I believe that the decisions that have been being made in McHenry County have not been being made in favor of working people. And I think that I can make some better decisions.
That is great, Lynn. Do you have a website that you want people to know about?
I currently don't have a website.
Or a Facebook page?
A Facebook page is Lynn Gray, McHenry County Board, District 5.
Okay, with an A or an E? Gray?
Gray, Gray.
A-Y. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Lynn. Congratulations. And Lynn mentioned Peter. Peter, you're running for what? The state representative?
Yeah.
Illinois 63? So
yeah.
Take the microphone.
Okay. Okay, hi, everybody. My name is Pete Janko. I'm currently the Democratic State Central Committeeman for the 14th Congressional District. And I'm going to put on my State Central Committeeman hat. One of the reasons that I'm actually running for state rep is because last year I was one of Lauren Underwood's super volunteers, and the 63rd District happens to be the area that I worked very hard for. So I figured this year, okay, I'm going to be out for Lauren Underwood again, and I might as well run on myself so we get a twofer, okay?
Okay, great. And do you have a website, Peter?
Yes, I have a website too. It's Pete, the number 4, Illinois. And I'd like all of you to I'd like to encourage all of you to just find a candidate, that's pro-labor, that's out there for us, and volunteer a couple of hours. Now we got fantastic stuff. You can phone bake from the couch. You can text from a couch. You don't even have to get out of the house. So if you're uncomfortable meeting people, we'll take you out to community canvases, but we really need to start doing stuff that benefits the working families. Thank you.
Going door to door gets you exercise that's good for you. Thank you, Peter. And Alice Wilson-Shirkey. There you go. It'll take just a second to get the microphone back there.
Alice, tell us about your candidacy.
Hello, my name is Alice Wilson, just recently Cherokee.
Congratulations.
And I'm running for a judge in DuPage County, Illinois. And you all know how important it is to have very good judges on the bench. Now, I've been a lawyer for 28 years, defending in criminal, divorce, and family law. I've also been a judge, but an administrative law judge for 22 years in Cook County for the city of Chicago, hearing and adjudicating over city ordinance violations. I also serve as an arbitrator in Cook County, where I hear mostly personal injury cases. And prior to becoming a lawyer, I worked for the federal government as a contract specialist, whereby I put together, awarded, and worked over large construction contracts for General Services Administration with the federal government. So I've had a pretty elaborate career here. Now I think it's time that I take the bench, because I've defended lots of people throughout my 28 years, and I believe there's only one set of rules for everyone, and that's the law, and that law should be applied without prejudice or bias towards anyone.
Alice, do you have a website real quick?
Yeah, I don't have that up yet, but you can go to Alice Wilson Judge DuPage, and that's my Facebook page.
Great.
But Tom, finally I want to say, let's make history in DuPage.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Say that again. Elect the first African-American judge in DuPage County.
Yeah, in DuPage County.
Great. Alice,
Thank
good
you.
luck, and thank you so much. Good on you. So, welcome back. David Axelrod just tweeted, "This is interesting. This is changing the race." And David Axelrod is no neophyte to politics. He basically made or helped make Barack Obama president. Obviously, Barack Obama made Barack Obama president, but David Axelrod played a very, very large role in that. And he just tweeted out, it's reported that, let me get the exact number here. Here it is. $24.6 million was the amount of money that Elizabeth Warren raised in the third quarter of this year. That's huge. And he tweeted a story from Politico about that. And his comment was, big dollar number for Elizabeth Warren, continuing her role. Long way to go, but you put all the evidence together, polling, organization, messaging, and enthusiasm, you'd have to say she is now the front runner to win the Democratic nomination. I think that's great news to have a real progressive, a serious progressive who is now in the front runner position. I'm curious, my panelists, your thoughts on the current lineup of Democrats. I mean, I am right up front saying I love Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. They're solid progressives, but I will work my butt off for Joe Biden or Amy Klobuchar or anybody else, regardless. Vote blue no matter whoever gets the nomination. But that said, Lou Cairo, what are your thoughts on the current Democratic field?
I just wish the Democrats would get together and figure out who's the best candidate to beat Trump and just go from there, because we're spending so much time and so much money and so much distraction about a dozen guys and women that are fighting each other. And
I'd like to see them set the threshold at 5% in the polls to be in the debates. I mean, we'd be down to 4 people.
Right, because we should be concentrating on. They should be concentrating their efforts on attacking Trump, not attacking each other. Because all they're doing is they're giving Trump's people a portfolio of things, of truthful things apparently that he can use against him. He'll use all the lies in the world when it actually gets down to the presidential elections. But they're giving him a lot. They are giving Trump's people a lot of stuff to pick on, whoever that candidate is going to be. And it's watching the debates. It's a circus. I mean, it's a shame.
On the other hand, the same thing happened 4 years ago, and there's a Republican in the White House, so it didn't turn out as a disaster. But I get your point, and I agree with it. John, your thoughts? John Daniel, the business manager here at Smart Local.
I think the sooner we get it whittled down to 1, 2, three primary people that we can really hear their issues and their voice, and they're talking at what's going to affect change in the middle class, the better we're going to be. Because frankly, most of the peer group I speak with, just from Trump's tweets and news, he's on the news every day, right? Mm-hmm. It used to be, when I was growing up, you see the president give the State of the Union, and then maybe there was something happening, world crisis, where the president would come up. Now the president comes up, he's on a daily show, right?
He's a reality star. He's
Absolutely.
running a reality show out of the White House.
But what that equals is people turn it off. And then when we have 20 candidates running for the Democratic primary, people turn it off. And they think that it's just too much white noise as I'm trying to provide for my family, I'm trying to raise my family, and I'm doing all this stuff. I'm tired. It gets heavy. It's a lot of water to carry. So to Lou's point, the sooner we get the field narrowed, the better we can talk about policy that's going to affect change in our country. And I think it's gonna be a fun race.
Cool. And we'll get your opinion right after the break, all right? All right, Jim. We'll be right back. We're live from Chicago here with WCPT. Stick with us.
History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The hidden history of the Supreme Court and the betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Welcome back. Welcome back from Chicago. We were just talking about the Democratic field. David Axelrod tweeting that, in his opinion, and of course it's just one man's opinion, although he's a well-respected leader in the Democratic Party, or a consultant, whatever. He's never been elected to anything, but helped make Barack Obama president. He points out that Elizabeth Warren just raised almost $25 million in the third quarter. I know Bernie's numbers are in that neighborhood too, very strong numbers. He says big number for Warren continuing her role, and bottom line, he says you'd have to say she is now the front runner to win the Democratic nomination. I was soliciting opinions on the Democratic field here. We've been talking about elections. We just heard from some really great candidates. Jim Allen, president of the Bricklayers, your thoughts on the Democratic field?
Yeah, actually, I do like Elizabeth Warren, but I like a lot of the candidates there. Like everyone says, it would be nice to have it down to a few, so you could really get into an interesting debate. But you know what? I vote, and my family votes the union wallet. That's all we look at who's backing unions, and that's who I back. I don't really care about anything else. Unions. I don't care about abortions. I don't care about the color of anyone's skin. I care about the unions, and that's what I try to promote with my union people, to get them to vote the right way to keep the unions stronger, because the middle class is the unions. When the unions are gone, middle class is gone, and we've all seen that since Reagan, and I know the man to my right here talks about it constantly, that Reagan was the beginning of the end for the middle class. And but I'll be honest with you, if it was down to Donald Trump and SpongeBob SquarePants, SpongeBob would have my vote.
There you go. Amen. Vote blue no matter who. There you go. We have a question from the audience.
Hi, Tom. My name is John. I'm a retired Smart Local 265 member, and something that thanks. Yeah, it's good to be retired. Something that Jim Allen mentioned before caught my attention when he mentioned that 50 to 60% of our members probably voted for Trump. And I thought to myself, how can that be? And then I started thinking, well, the guy who comes home from work and takes off his work boots and puts his hard hat away, probably doesn't think any of these people know what he needs, what he wants. They don't really care about him. And that guy is probably our member that voted for Trump because he thought elections really don't have any consequences. They're all the same. What's the difference? It's a challenge to labor leaders like John, who's my business manager, and Jim Allen and everybody else, to contact those members and let them know that the elections do have consequences. And one of them, I'd like you guys to comment on, if you could, would be the Janus decision. The worst piece of anti-union legislation to come along in 70 years. Why? Because we have Donald Trump, who appointed a conservative Supreme Court. And why did that happen? Because we had a conservative governor in the state who filed suit on behalf of some guy named Janus. And it changed the world as far as organized labor went. And I think our members need to know that. So that's my challenge. And if you guys could speak on it, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, who wants to speak to Janus?
I think, even though it's a legal thing, I think John, when I talked about it earlier, John knows it very well.
John, go for it.
If you,
that was a nice setup, Lou.
Yeah.
You can, by the way, you can read about it in my book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. And if you go to thomhartmann.com/labor.pdf, there is an entire chapter from my book on the Supreme Court that goes through every Supreme Court decision since the 1930s that directly impacted labor, right up to and through Janus. Go for it.
Well, I like to think John, the retired 265 member that stood up and spoke, and he makes a great point. Not only is he a retired member, he's one of my mentors, former business manager, Local 265, so thank you for being here. The Janus Act, so if he said it exactly, elections have consequences. Illinois is a blue state. You know, they villainize Illinois across the Republican platform as we're a stronghold for organized labor, but yet the Janus came out of 15 miles to the northwest of here, and our previous governor is the one that filed suit. Janus basically, it did make public sector unions right to work. All right, and if you don't believe
to work for less.
Right to work for less, absolutely. and if you don't know what that means, that's not a pro-labor legislation. I know I talk to my family lives in Missouri, and they'll run flags saying, I'm supporting my son, my cousin, who's a labor leader because right to work, everyone's got the right to work. The entire spin on what right to work is, it's disgusting, all right? They're really good at marketing, and we need to do a better job messaging and making sure that our members, our neighbors, our kids, our family know that elections have consequences. If you don't believe it, the Janus decision in itself wiped out 70 years of legislation that protected organized labor and the voice in the workforce in a public sector union. And if you don't believe private sectors aren't under attack, you got to get your head out of the dirt, out of the sand, and pay attention, because there's a huge push for national right to work. And if we don't get to the polls, if we don't make the right decisions to protect ourselves and our families, our pensions are going to be, there's going to be huge talk about our pensions coming up with the PPGC. If you haven't heard about it yet, it's going to be loud and clear in the news over the next months, all right? We have to take action. We have to protect ourselves. No one up the food chain politically is going to protect us like we can protect ourselves. So get the message out. If you're listening to this and you're part of organized labor, if you got a family that's part of organized labor, if you want to be part of organized labor, reach out to an organizer, a union in your area, get engaged. We have to change policy from the grassroots all the way up.
Yeah, and this is a crime that was committed by the Supreme Court, and they did it because we had Republican presidents and a Republican Senate that fixed the court basically the way it is.
Disgusting.
Yeah, it really is. We'll be back with more live from Chicago here on WCPT.
Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We're live at Smart 265's Labor Hall, just outside suburban Chicago. Thom Hartmann with you. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Our book for today on the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Kingdom of Lies, Unnerving Adventures in the World of Cybercrime by Kate Fazzini. This is from the preface. It didn't take me long in my career as a cybersecurity executive to figure out everyone was lying to me. The biggest lie of all came at the very beginning, that cybersecurity is hard, too hard, certainly too difficult for someone who lacks years and years of deep technical training. That is no place for writers. That thicket of incomprehensible jargon alone seemed meant to discourage outsiders like me from entering the field. They told me I could never hope to understand the terminology unless I'd worked around it for a very long time, unless I had a special and complicated certification, unless I knew how to take apart and reassemble a computer, unless I knew how to code in Python and could read it, interpret it, and spot problems on sight. And if I somehow managed to learn the lingo, the learning curve for the rest of it would prove insurmountable. Lies, lies, lies. It's unfortunate because there's a huge gap between the demand for cybersecurity workers and the people available to fill those jobs. I think one of the reasons for that is because people can't imagine themselves doing this kind of work. Can you use a smartphone, make a PowerPoint, think on your feet, ever organize a night out to the movies with your friends that went well and nobody crashed their car to or from the event? Welcome to the 21st century's hottest career path. Are you able to charm the pants off women? Did you escape an abusive marriage? Have you ever hosted a toddler's birthday party at your home? Honey, I want you on my cybersecurity team. After reading the stories in this book, you will understand that what makes cybersecurity complicated is the complexity of human beings. So if you know how to deal with people, you can handle internet security. If you understand what makes people tick, not only will you be able to recognize a threat, you'll be one step ahead of your adversary. During my career as a cybersecurity executive at multinational corporations, a journalist for Wall Street Journal and later CNBC, and a professor at Georgetown University, I've met a lot of fascinating people. From the hackers who perpetrate malicious attacks to the security professionals who try to prevent these incidents from happening, and the alphabet soup of government agencies that do damage control. At the end of the day, they're all fathers, sons, mothers, sisters, and spouses. In other words, people just like us. Yes, the white hats cross paths with black hats and change alliances more frequently than you might expect, but they're driven by the same desires as the rest of us, even if sometimes it feels as if everyone in cybersecurity is allergic to the truth. As a professional, I was told a great many lies about the field I've grown to love so much. After becoming a journalist on the cybersecurity beat, I was told even more. Here are a few. Let me introduce you to the hacker community. This lie is usually delivered with a wink and a nod from someone who thinks they know every hacker on the planet. The truth of the matter is there is no hacker community. Sure, the guys who make a splash at the big annual conferences might say otherwise, but every country, every state, every faction, every identifying group has its own community of people who hack computers. Some of them are extremely conservative. Others are massively liberal. Some fall in between. Some wear suits and ties and work as lawyers during the day, while others look like everyday citizens and have great people skills as they pursue the idiosyncratic agendas. Some are good guys who got fed up with low pay and boring duties and became criminals. Some are criminals who ended up being good guys. Many start and end their careers on either end of that spectrum. Some, including many you'll meet in this book, are extremely proficient hackers who have no time or inclination to identify with any community at all. As a journalist, I was astonished at the number of people who came out of the woodwork to offer me exclusive access to the hacker community. I couldn't help but notice that the members of the source's hacker community were often people just like him or her. My point is there are many different types of people working in this field, and I can guarantee you that a lot of them are exactly like you. Here's another lie. He's a luminary in the cybersecurity field. He's probably not. Fame and luminescence don't typically intersect in this field. The people I've met who are actual geniuses aren't famous, and most of them don't have social media profiles. They tend not to pontificate on areas outside their expertise. The people who are constantly headlining conferences and who are so often offered up to me for interviews have less insight than those who stay underground. Anything a high-profile hacker is willing to share typically carries with it a massive and crystal clear agenda that I've learned to spot from a mile away. Even if a conversation is off the record, the intel coming from a top government official or other marquee corporate cybersecurity name carries little novel information. The only people who have illuminated the way for me in this world, and in this book, have been genuine practitioners who never held a C-level title. You've never heard of them, and because I've changed their names to protect their privacy, you probably never will. They are luminaries not because of the degrees they've collected or the events they've headlined, but because they carry a lantern that guides the path for others. These types of people typically don't have a public relations team. One of my favorite lies, he doesn't know what he's talking about. This one is usually delivered by someone who asserts that he or she knows the cybersecurity field better than anyone else. These people will brag that they know what it's like to be a hacker and can do things that no one else in the room can do. I'm always wary of those who try to establish their bona fides by discrediting the expertise of other cybersecurity professionals. The depth and breadth of this field is so vast that anyone who works in it is an expert at some part of it. And I have yet to meet someone who is an expert at all of it, not even close. Every view of an incident is informed by the reviewer, what he sees, what her level of expertise is, and that changes over time. It's like asking someone who lives in the plaza to describe Manhattan. The book is Kingdom of Lies by Kate Fazzini. Thom Hartmann Cruise will be sailing in July of 2020. The 7-day Oceania cruise will be going to Bermuda, and I'll be hosting onboard events about the topics of the day. More info at thomhartmann.com or 800-856-1155.
Chicago, here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We're doing our program today from the Sheet Metal Workers Smart 265 Labor Hall. John Daniel with us, what's your title? Business Manager for Smart Local 265. Jim Allen, the President of the Bricklayers. Lou Cairo, partner with the law firm GWC. Thank you, Lou. And there's a couple of topics that I just want to hit on one at a time and go through this stuff. And I want to wrap up with a discussion about pensions right after our last break. But Lou, I'd like to start with you. You have some very specific thoughts on. I mentioned earlier, I believe I've heard this in a couple of places. I haven't actually seen the numbers, so I can't say that it's 100% certain, but it's damn close if it's not. That Donald Trump, because of the last 2.5, 3 years of the Obama administration, Mitch McConnell would not allow any of Obama's judicial nominees to go through, including Merrick Garland, but also the other federal courts, that Donald Trump in 3 years has appointed more federal judges than any president in the history of the United States. What does that mean for working people? What does that mean for the average person? What are the consequences of Trump's relationship and frankly, McConnell's and the Republican parties with the federal courts and the Supreme Court?
You know, people always think it's so important to have the right politician in a position, but if you think about it, in our normal daily lives, we don't really get to deal with the president. We don't get to deal with even our senators. We deal in courthouses all the time, though, and people in our community, our employers, whether it's a car accident, a workers' comp case, whatever. Things that affect our livelihood are more at the ground roots level, which is really like the court system. In the state court, you have to be elected. Even our state Supreme Court justices, every 3 years, they go through an election. They have to be elected by the people. In federal court, you get appointed by the president. And when you get appointed, you wash your hands and you walk away because it's a lifetime appointment. And people really don't understand that. So when you get a federal judge who is an anti-union judge, and if Donald Trump put him in, you can pretty much be certain that is an anti-union, anti-middle class, anti-what built America type of a judge. So you have somebody who's in that seat for the rest of their life until they decide they want to pass up their $200,000 salary and they're just going to go off to greener pastures, like some of our good friends that are able to do in the unions, right? But these are guys that men and women that will be there for the rest of their lives if they choose to. And when you have judges like, as John was talking about in the Janus decision, I mean, that goes to a conservative judge, and they're like, yep, public sector, you guys don't have to be in a union, but the union has to do all the negotiating, has to give you all the representation, but you don't have to pay a damn penny for it. That's not from a Democratic appointed judge. That's from a federally appointed judge by a Republican president of the United States. And when McConnell brilliantly held up all those confirmations, we didn't get Merrick Garland, who was a fantastic jurist. He was he wasn't super one-sided or the other. He was just a great jurist. Guy literally cried when he accepted the nomination from President Barack Obama.
He was Orrin Hatch's suggestion.
I mean,
a Republican.
Right, and Mitch McConnell did everything in his power to make sure, and he did it brilliantly, that there was no confirmation hearing. And as soon as Trump became a president, all of a sudden the floodgates open, and here comes one more conservative after another. We've got Gorsuch, we've got Kavanaugh, we've got all these ones in federal court, the federal judges. We've got Ruth Ginsburg, who is hanging out on the wing of a prayer. Thank God. I hope she lasts and stays on that bench until we get a Democratic president, because if, God forbid, God forbid Trump gets to appoint another federal U.S. Supreme Court justice, they have a supermajority now. And the Democratic issues will never, ever, ever see the light of day. And you will see vast changes in so many things in this world. I mean, from abortion to guns to things that deal specifically, as Jim says, you vote your union, you vote your paycheck, right? If that's your way of life, you vote how you earn your living. Because if you don't make any money, if you don't have a job, you can't buy bullets for your gun. You can't even, you can't do the things in life that is, John says, you have that pyramid, that trickle-down effect where it all centers around one thing and only one thing. Support your family, put your babies to school, get them an education, build your house, so to speak. If you can't do those things because you don't have a job, then all you do is you come here for free pizza, but this radio program won't even exist anymore. I mean, these men will be out of a job. Men will not be retiring like John talked about, and the gentleman from the IBW 134. They're not going to be retiring with pensions. What's it? People will be working until they're 90 years old, and then they're going to drop dead poor. That's just what's going to happen. And if we are a world full of federal judges in this country, we are destined for disaster in that regard. And there's no stopping. You can get the greatest leader in the world. We can get the entire Congress, all Democrats. But every case that goes up to the Supreme Court and the federal courts is going to be answered not by those Democrats that are in Congress or in the White House. It's going to be answered decided upon by Republican judges that's just their philosophy. They read the law differently than a Democratic judge does. I mean, one quick example. Gorsuch had a case where a trucker was driving in a blizzard. The truck broke down. I mean, it was frozen, right? He disconnects his trailer. He gets his truck to safely get out, but he left his trailer there. And he was fired on the job, and Gorsuch wrote the opinion he should have been fired. He left his trailer on the side of the highway. He was saving his own life, right? But if you want to talk about, let's try to screw the little guy who's out there trying to save his life in the middle of a blizzard, and then you support the fact that the guy should be fired? Really?
Well, not just that. I mean, Gorsuch said that he should have stayed there and died, basically.
Yeah, I'm saying. So it's unconscionable.
This guy's on the Supreme Court now. This is when he was on,
right. And he's there for life.
That's right. Yeah. Okay. Important stuff. John, you wanted to tell us about Women Build Nations. Tell us about this.
Yeah. So we talk about diversification. You heard me earlier say the traditional name is Journeymen. We're changing that. It's Journey Person now. We're trying to have a more inclusive fabric amongst all unions. It's a North American Building Trades Union initiative. I just wanted to do a shout out right now in Minnesota. Starting today is the 9th annual Women Build Nations Conference. I applaud Sean McGarvey, president of North American Building Trades Union. I applaud our general president, Joseph Sellers, who's out there now with the whole contingent of people. Men, women, white, black, Hispanic, everybody coming together to have the conversation of how do we listen? How do we understand what to diversify who we are and to make us stronger, frankly? How do we do that? I know recently one of my newest business agents, Louisa Medina, first female elected business agent in our local. Thank you. Really proud of her. She's changed the conversation in our boardroom. Her and the input from the other female members that we have, they bring up topics that when I sit around the table and look at my peer group, and if you can't see me and you're not on a thing, I'm a middle-aged white guy, right? How do I even understand the plight of what it is to be a female tradesperson in organized labor? And bringing Louise into the conversation, attending conferences like Women Build Nations has driven us to add a maternity benefit for female members. That was identified that's an obstacle. How do you sustain an income if you get pregnant in the trade? We've got a first-year apprentice who was Danielle Wilson was a first-year apprentice that was able to take advantage of that benefit, and it's us just slowing down for a minute and listening. We're all good at talking. We're labor leaders. We're all alpha males, right? But the value in being a leader, and Jim knows it, Lou knows it, Tom knows it. It's listening, and I'm just happen to sit in a position where I say what other people need to hear. And I get my message from my rank and file, the people who pay me to fight for them every day. And we're trying to diversify that group, and I'm really proud of the participation we have in the Women Build Nations and the conversation that we're changing collectively through that initiative.
That's great. And Jim Allen, the president of the Bricklayers, you wanted to talk about the teacher situation here in Chicago?
Yeah, I just wanted to touch base. You know, about 2 summers ago, Unite here, the hotel workers went on strike in Chicago, and it was a huge strike. It lasted a long time. And these are the people that, you know, clean our hotels, the lowest paid people in the world that actually stood up and fought. And the building trades backed them. A lot of our members walked off the jobs that they were striking. And it was solidarity, and it was a beautiful thing to see. And now the teachers in Chicago are on the verge of striking. We hope it doesn't happen. But you know what? Unions will stick together. If they do go out, we're behind anybody that has a picket sign in their hands. So that's hopefully that'll get resolved. And I wanted to do one little plug. We have a Proud Union Day outing. This will be the second one. Anyone that has a union card, they're invited to Edison Park Inn on 6715 North Olmsted in Chicago on November 24th from 1 to 4. And it's kind of a solidarity thing that some of us have put together. And you know what? We're all union. We got to keep up the fight for ourselves, because a lot of people aren't fighting for us. And one last issue. You know, every time Trump bashes the free press, that bothers me so much I can't even tell you, because it's basically saying that, you know what, he's the only one telling the truth, and the truth tellers are the liars. And that is, to me, one of the worst things that a president could ever say. The free press is the greatest treasure of our democracy. Shows like this, there's nothing better than these things for our democracy. So keep it up.
Thanks a lot, Jim. We'll be back. We're going to talk about pensions and what's going on here in the United States with retirees in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program live from Chicago, from Sheet Metal Workers Smart 265 Labor Hall. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be right back. Stick around.
Thanks.
Do we have any questions from the audience for this segment? Okay, you got one here. Go for it. You're on the air.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to make a comment about what the gentleman was talking about the right to work.
Mm-hmm.
I went from Illinois back to Mississippi for almost 2 years, and it's like stuck in the twilight zone. There are very few unions, and you can get fired just, you come in and the boss is in a bad mood, boom. He doesn't have to give you a reason, just you're fired. And you can't do anything, So the right to work thing is crazy. Hmm. So whoever, they spin it to where it makes it sound like it's a union, you have a choice, blah, 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 but no.
Yeah, and the Republicans started pushing this back in the 1940s. I mean, 1947 was Taft-Hartley, and which gave individual states the right to opt out of the National Labor Relations Act, or at least that part of it, so that employers could basically screw their workers, even unionized employers. Jim, you want to riff on that a little bit?
Yeah, it does go back. Most people think that's something new, but it doesn't. It goes way back. You said 45?
47.
47, yeah. I did read something about that at one point, but you're right. The right to work for less is what it is. And
Harry Truman vetoed it twice.
Did he really?
And he got overridden.
Yeah. So, Wisconsin went right to work. Indiana went right to work. Ohio went right to work for less. Missouri went right to work for less. Illinois was on the verge of right to work for less had we not gotten rid of Rauner in the 4 years that it took to get rid of him. It's out there, and it's a ball. The ball's in their court right now to make it across the country. I think John touched base on that a little bit. The Republicans would love to see the whole country right to work for less. And again, union people have to wake up and fight. I was talking to one of the brothers from 399 at the break. And you know what? If union members and their families voted correctly and voted for their union instead of their stupid ideal like guns or whatever, or they don't like blacks, or they don't like gays, or they don't, whatever. If you just voted for your paycheck and voted union, we'd control everything in all the big major cities and states. So, that's our, as John and me talk about, that's our biggest stick, is how to get people to vote right, because sometimes they just want to. I even talked to the brother out there. I said, he goes, it's a macho thing. You know what? Yeah, you know what? I like Trump. He tells it the way it was. Hillary, she's a criminal. Lock her up. And I think it is a bit of a macho thing. But I've always told my family, I said, this is a true story, if I ever knew that you voted Republican, I'd take you out of the will. Not to just, and I really mean that. I would take him out of the will. And not much there, but I'd take him out anyway.
Do any of you guys know if the Janus decision, like Taft-Hartley, gave individual states the right to opt out with regard to workers? That was federal, wasn't it? Isn't that nation? Wasn't federal. Janus basically right to work not for less nationwide?
Yeah, that was at the Supreme Court level. That's a federal case. From what I understand, I heard scuttlebutt that we could do a constitutional amendment in the state of Illinois to change it. We're trying to find a way to do a swim move or to run the thing over here in the state of Illinois, but it is it was done at the Supreme Court. It's a federal thing.
There you go. Okay, we'll be back. We're going to check in about pensions. John's got some really good information to share with us. We'll be right back, live from Chicago. Stick around.
Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere. At Thom.
And welcome back. We're live from Chicago here at Smart 265's Union headquarters, or Union Hall. And John Daniel. John is the business manager for Smart Local 265, the sheet metal workers. And you and I were talking just before the last break about the current state of pensions. And you're really, really good at boiling this stuff down and summarizing it and clarifying it. I'd like you to do your little riff here for us and inform people what's coming down the road. And let me just set this up. Right now, about a quarter of retired Americans, people over 65, about a quarter of them are living exclusively on Social Security, which means about 3/4 of retired Americans either have a part-time job or they have a pension. That is my generation, the boomer generation, my parents' generation. That's us aging out as, that's the remnants of pensions. When pensions go away, and my grandmother's living on Social Security. She gets $800 a month. How do you live on $800 a month, right? And Social Security doesn't go up every year along with the cost of living. The COLA is not specific to the expenses of actual retirement. So without pensions, we're going to have a massive poverty problem in the United States, probably within the next decade or so. John, please speak to this.
Thanks, Tom. So it's a deep conversation, and what Tom and I were talking on the side is he could do a 3-hour segment just on what's in front of us with pensions and some of the stuff that we as the general population, whether you're part of a defined benefit pension or not, the causation of the failure of some of these pension plans and how that impacts society as a whole. So organized labor, and I'll use them specifically, we belong to a multi-employer pension program. So we have multiple employers that have multiple members that work for them. They all contribute to one fund. It's called a multi-employer pension plan. The federal government came up with a strategy to require insurance It's a government agency called the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation. It's an insurance company that's required to back and support the possibility of a multi-employer plan failing. All right, so you need to understand a pension structure in its core thing is my members here directly in Local 265, they defer wages into a pension plan that we invest as a group, and the promise is that we're going to give that deferred money back to you when you retire with interest and make payments so you can offset the cost of living that Social Security, it's there, it's very important, but it's not real, it doesn't really get you where you need to be in my estimation. So there's this insurance company called the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation. Unfortunately, it's imminent that the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation is going to fail. It's going to become insolvent. And there was a lot of talk about it in the press last year. The federal government created a task force called the Joint Select Committee that was tasked at figuring out how do we maintain the solvency of this PBGC, the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation. In the political arena that we have at the federal government, they had some ideas on how to fix it, but their resolve at the end of November last year was we think there is a plan, but we don't have a plan, and they closed it. They knew that it's going to fail. It's 99.9% likely to fail 2025. All right. So when we say likely to fail, what does that mean? And what I need listeners to understand, Tom, this is what we were talking about in the break, is if it fails, if I'm a pensioner from the Midwest and I'd like to go to Arizona or somewhere where it's a warmer climate and enjoy my elder years, I take my pension with me there, right? And if the multi-employer pension plan that I belong to fails, the PBGC is supposed to ensure that benefit. If it fails, there's 3 large pension plans right now that are imminent to fail. They're in critical and declining status. They are going to fail. It's a mathematical certainty. Those 3 plans failing will break the insurance company that's promised to shore up the benefit the government created. It's a whole mess. Right now, it takes $50 billion infused into this insurance company in order to maintain solvency going forward. And don't quote me on any of these numbers because I was just at a conference. If it fails and they don't invest $50 billion into this plan, it's going to cost the federal government in tax dollars $35 billion per year in lost revenue. So it's taxes on the pensions that they're getting plus the dollars that they spend in the community because of it. Now think of the social economic impact. So my members or whoever they are, they move to Arizona, Florida to retire. The Pension Benefit Guaranty Corp is going to give them cents on the dollar of what they were getting as a pensioner. What does that do to those states? What is the social impact, social services? What does that do to society as a whole if we as a people allow the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation to fall? You're going to hear a lot of talk about that in the coming months. It's imminent. Something has to be done. There was a Butch-Lewis Act that was presented at the federal level. I believe Dick Durbin was one of the co-sponsors on it. That's had a couple revisions. But if you look into Butch-Lewis, you're going to be hearing about the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation. Pay attention to it. Whether you're in a pension or not, it's going to affect each and every one of us, and we have to find a way to solve it. We need to talk to the Senate ASAP and tell them Butch-Lewis or something has to happen to shore up the PBGC.
Thank you, John. John Daniel, Business Manager, Smart Local 265. Louis Cairo, partner with GWC Law Firm, and Jim Allen, the president of the Bricklayers. Right. Thank you, guys. Thank you all. Thanks to WCPT and to all the sponsors for this program. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It does require all of us. So get out there, get active. Tag, you're it. We'll see you Monday.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
We say fight back!
Thom Hartmann here. My new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, has arrived. What if the Supreme Court did not have the power to strike down laws? Discover the hidden history of judicial review and this scam called original intent. Learn how we can save the planet by modernizing the Supreme Court. And most important, how we can democratize the Supreme Court now before it's too late. From the time Americans wake up until the time we go to bed, everything we do, touch, ingest, breathe, and use has been touched by the Supreme Court. In this book, I lay out the history of the Supreme Court from Alexander Hamilton until how the court overstepped its constitutional powers. America does not belong to the kings and queens of the court. It belongs to the people. The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America is available now in fine bookstores everywhere.
Thank you.